change it.
Yeah, that's what I do. I will do that.
You could,
I'm gonna shut that door for June.
yeah. See what it gives. This is a kitchen door anyways. Nobody needs to be in there. And you could turn off the light, actually. There you go. You need to get closer?
No, I like having some people in the shop.
Yeah.
I mean, I like doing that, but I might do that when nobody comes in. Give like a room into that. Because you can't, you only have 2 cameras. Not a whole lot you can do with this one and that.
Right.
And this one.
Sure.
So that's why I go to this room. I have a graphic and the other graphic. Take one graphic away. Switch to this one with the graphic on. With the graphic off.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
Good combination.
So you're doing that in the moment, those decisions.
Well, yeah. See, here's how it goes.
You could do one camera face the audience and one camera facing the crowd.
Here's how it goes. Okay. The one on the left, that's what I'm staging. Okay. The one on the right, that's what I'm doing. Right? So, on the one I'm staging, who's our next guy? Say for instance, Judy. That's her next.
Jesse's the next person. Or Judy. I think Judy will.
Okay, so here's how I do it. That's my staging, right? So then if I want to go to it, I hit this button there. We just switch to that camera, right? So then, oh, wait a minute, I'm gonna take away the graphic. Wait a minute, let's take away the graphic. And okay, boom, the graphic's gone. Okay. Let's see, we want the graphic back, or whatever.
Okay, so you go back and forth between the graphics. See, I think Judy's.
Judy. And after Judy's talking for a while, then I go, okay, well, let's put the graphic on her too. Boom. There she is. Okay, wait a minute, I want to see her name too, right? So when I do, I pull this one down below it. See, Judy. Pull Judy down below it.
Jeremy about the programs too, because he was going to print them and then I didn't see them.
So I'll keep her name off till she comes on. Is Jeremy going to introduce to me or Jess?
I think Judy's the one that's next up.
Judy's next. Okay. So that's right there.
So Jesse's going to go next.
Jesse's going next. Brent. bend it strictly. I'm gonna put that in parentheses between your name. Who would have known that a simple going to get your car checked out, suddenly you'd be stuck with a moniker now for the rest of your life. The Bandit. See, she's got motion graphic now.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's had enough time to settle in.
I was thinking I'd like to get to know how to do that. Probably not so difficult, more difficult than an image.
Go get them.
Yeah. Just find what kind of site do you go to do a motion graphic? Is it film?
Well, that could have been a GIF. I don't know. I don't know how she.
All set.
I know, isn't it great?
All set.
I know.
Yes, it's fantastic.
It's fabulous.
And Judy's and now.
Oh my
Brent's.
goodness.
We've got it all down.
Fabulous.
Everything at the perfect time.
Yes.
Yes, because we were just looking at your graphic
Yep.
and saying, well, now how do you do that?
How did you
How do
save
you
that?
get a motion graphic?
So what I did was I went in,
Is it GIF?
no, it's not a GIF, it's a video. And I went into the internet and I Googled video of moving glow or something. And I found a site where I could download this for free. They didn't charge me for it. And and if I were to ever publish this in any way, I would need to give them credit for where I got it from. But it was just there for the taking.
Open source.
It was open source, and then I could just, using Keynote, because Mac is so easy. I mean, I use PowerPoint too, but I could just drag it in and put it there, and then I fixed the animation so that as soon as the thing goes up, it starts moving.
And continuous, it doesn't stop.
Yeah, I mean it does. If you watch it, it glitches and then it repeats. I put it on a loop. It's on a loop.
Okay, so you use the
Loop is there, but it's yeah.
And then you just same as an image, they have those options where you want the image behind the text or in front of the
Yes,
text.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just upload the text on top.
With the way to do it.
Nice.
And I just thought, God, I need something for integrality, and that's a round ball, and so it's gotta.
Yeah, the Gestalt operates through different senses of awareness that are all at the center of it.
Make sure you have a very short talk
For
with
your
your work.
presentation. Feel free not to stand. You can walk through your
Smallest
things and
number.
stuff, because we will do that. The light will shine on you,
Okay,
and you'll be able to see you.
okay. I may come out. I mean, my thing is my builds are kind of, they happen. So if I had a clicker, which I don't, but it's okay. I mean, I'll just be
Just
fine.
take a
Yeah, I'll step around up here.
No, I
see.
mean, look at it
All
right
right, watch
now.
me see.
And I'll show you.
Okay. All right, I could come out on
You
occasion.
want to venture
So you
to
see-
trying a different flash drive?
Yeah.
You see?
There you go.
You'll see something.
Yeah, no, I see you. I see you there. All right. I
So-
could always kind of come out.
Yes.
And if I sort of, even if I stand
And it's a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
I mean, even if I kind of stood to the side here, like how's that?
No, I
So
don't
I
need it.
walk
We're
a
just
little bit?
pretty much a silhouette at
I
that
still
point.
am, okay.
Did you get a chance?
So it's I really have to come all the way here, like to actually run in this.
I did.
Yeah, you have to have the light shining on you and feel free to walk up, because, this is a pretty much a far shot and there's nothing I can do about it.
Okay, all right. Well, I may or may not do that. I'll see
Yeah,
how it goes.
no,
But,
this-
I
I'm
mean,
just
if
sa-
I-
I'm just
if I
saying
can-
feel
I
free.
mean, I can move around here. I could come around in here.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want. It's your presentation.
It's my break.
Have it your way.
Exactly. Thank you. Right. I just have to-
Yes.
Jess,
Actually, I read it.
Because I have to kick her off.
I know we all are.
Pretty awesome.
In the future,
Right, or even just
So
like
late
reading
people
like
just don't like
here.
Thank you.
got that instead, that still just shows you as a
It's, I think it's great. Listen, as long as my slides are showing, that's all I care about. Yeah. If I can just do that.
really good shape.
All right.
Yeah, okay, good. And I will not trip on cords.
Hey, Steve.
Did you see? Fantastic. Yes.
Here's a program for you.
Yes, I did. She brought me.
Can,
There's a program for you tomorrow, so you can.
can an Apple usually use a PowerPoint?
Oh, yeah.
This is actually Keynote.
Okay. I was wondering if an Apple could manage a PowerPoint.
Yes.
And Apple manages a PowerPoint, yeah, easily. And I mean, I could have done this in PowerPoint, but Apple gives you, it's just a little bit more,
I mean, I have a PC rather than Apple, and I have a PowerPoint, and I wanted to.
Oh, yeah, you'll be able to run it. Because like, you'll run it off of her computer, and
Yeah.
this is a PC, so.
That's nice that you got a rotating globe behind
Would
it.
you like a glass of water?
I know, it was a video, and I found it on the internet for free. So I was
You
able,
could, the one you used, you could actually push. Maybe I can with PowerPoint. That's
you could
good.
with PowerPoint. You could with PowerPoint as
I
well.
could with PowerPoint too, I never tried that.
Yeah, it's just like, instead of inserting your image, you just insert a movie.
Oh,
Like
okay.
something with .mov on it.
Oh, okay.
And it just makes it, a really big file. Like this
Right.
file is 170 megabytes, it's huge, but
That's nice.
yeah, it works. So it's like, yay. I was excited when I found it.
I don't have it, my PowerPoint's kind of old. Yeah, that feature.
Yeah, it might, even if it's old.
Yeah.
I mean, I was using a 2011 version for a long time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I have to play around with it.
Yeah, I know, it's fun. Let me go see.
I'm just trying a couple things. If I can get you in there,
Okay.
I would like to.
Can you see me there?
Oh wow.
Is that good?
Yeah, I'm actually going to get you.
Oh, excellent. All right, it's not too, okay. God, I hope I don't have things between my teeth.
Florida, but there's no hurricane.
Pretty much, you're in the night times.
Okay, good.
Nighttime
Okay, good.
lighting.
I'm darkened out. I like
Okay,
that.
look, I just wanna.
That's good. That's all better.
I just wanna.
You could take away the title, right? So you don't have the
Yeah.
title on it.
Yeah.
Caribbean, no hurricane.
Right. Yeah, actually, everything is kind of there.
Can we try some more light?
No, we tried it. No, it's okay. Anyway, it's like,
Everybody's bringing their best
Yes.
juice.
Please.
oh, okay.
We're actually recording this little process, and it's all about.
It's all right.
Yes, that's it's where you're gonna be, right?
Yeah, I'll be.
You know that's gonna work. That's
Yeah.
gonna work.
Okay.
Come here, look at this, Sabrina.
But he has to change the pictures, you can't.
I'm gonna take it out, right?
Yeah,
You know?
cool. This is so cool that you have two cameras.
There's another.
Nice. Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah, I do.
So-
That's great.
And then we also have you in there too. Oh, that's not you. You're just
I'm Jessie Shaw.
right here. Here you are.
Nice. Okay, good.
Okay.
Are you still up on that?
Yes.
Huh? This is the preview.
Oh, okay.
This is what I'm gonna have on mine.
Okay.
So I'll be starting with the other, with this camera actually. That's what I'll be starting with. Now I have this graph.
Oh, it's the stretchy kind, I think.
What did you think of mine? Because I thought about that quite a bit. I wanted to add pictures. I'm very visual myself. So I wanted to give a sense, of the person who said that. I was coordinate the two backgrounds. The fact that they were born in the same year, they were both raised in
Nowadays,
Atlanta. That's what we're trying to figure out. I've been trying to figure it out for 3 years. Well, they were all in the same, I mean, you know, Gebser had the same comparison. Intellectual, artistic circle. He had to know those guys. But I've never.
Yeah, good.
That's very side.
Oh, that.
And nobody has responded to it. He corresponded.
Gebser is great, but I'm learning through higher learning as his
My
presentation.
nephew is very into him.
He wanted to do
also
the early life
he's also
design.
an actor and singer. And when I was
He said
back
he was
visiting my
Higher
family,
worked
I
with
got to go to a presentation with a show that he put on. And he wrote
he was the past president of the Gebser Society in Germany. And he was a young friend of Gebser's. And he hung out with Gebser and learned from his son. So he told Heiner about what he did and learning what houses and learning and sharing.
pretty
And back
amazing.
to school at Gebser. But Heiner was coming out for us. And what I understand is he was extremely introverted, quiet, and modest, very formal. And he hated to be called teacher. He hated to teach. He needed to teach. And they just and he just very relaxed. He like took it all down to this very human all space. And so I don't think he would have peers that would choose to discourse.
Well, I've been in Long Island all week.
Even what I
Just made it into one city.
Good, this is, I'm with Nicholas, but this is Kim.
Hi,
Hi, Nicholas, nice to meet you, sir.
Well, we're waiting to go to Pennsylvania and I just got to New York. How about you? You're in the city?
No, I'm from Dallas.
Individual.
I live in work, so stuck around. Yeah, me too. And are y'all presenting?
Well, this was, I
He
think
is,
that
my
I'm
husband is, late tonight it seems, and this is Ellen.
Hello.
Kim, I'm Dallas.
Kevin, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And I have said.
So I'm just along for the ride, but I'm enjoying the ride. Are you somebody who's followed this for a long time?
No, you know, a friend of mine introduced me to Jeremy and Kim together with a book club last year. We started with
Oh, yeah?
and I never heard of it before.
Do you have a title? I know that
It
you
was
Amazing.
and they observed.
the Jungian
What they
Institute.
call it.
Well, this got a little late start, but we have our getting here, so that was good. We got done. Good first.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as technical.
And the original school.
Yes, tomorrow, what was the lady that gave us the assignment about?
Could have been some kind of like.
Oh,
Sabrina?
Sabrina gave us an assignment, which I forgot when we went out to lunch. I told you all the time. Now you're mentioning it again, yeah. Yeah, so she could probably tell you better. Are you gonna be here Sunday?
In the city, yes.
I mean, for the, well,
I don't know.
wait, there's something going on Sunday morning. We can't go back to Pennsylvania. But, anyway, what? Sorry. Stop it. Listen, 20 minutes, just. And then I forgot what else. I guess, think about it, and then she's gonna have some questions. She'll send you an email, and then it's gonna be. You, and it's gonna be interesting. We're gonna talk about it Sunday morning, when they meet at a different place in the. Yeah, I didn't get the address either, but it's, yeah. Tomorrow's in here.
What happens is that
So, yeah, I'm curious not to forget all about it. Listening and then just listening. And then when we talk about it.
She's gonna send questions. It sounded like.
Well,
I heard a couple times.
I
note card.
Oh, yeah, I see.
And then I don't know if you're supposed to write down the answers or send it back to her or what. We should ask her.
Are you presenting next? Are you presenting?
Yeah, written down.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
It's wonderful. It's
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's such a big thing to digest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Exactly.
Look at how long it's been.
Yeah.
The words keep on happening.
Yes. Well, I guess they're live streaming them, so they said, which I guess means you can go back later. I don't know. Maybe you can go back and, oh, you're getting it on. Because they said during the intermission and all, they're trying to fix things up, they said this is all going to be on there free. So, I don't know.
The meaning of live streaming was guess what happened?
Well, that's what I'm saying. You have to ask. I thought live stream meant just live, you know, went on, but I think usually you can go back and see those over.
Is diaphanous is in motion, shimmering, fluttering, and continually changing in transparency. The fluids are frankly like the gossamer gowns of the ancient goddesses. I mean,
Very interesting.
that's why I like diaphanous better than transparency.
Even so, if we want to be in the present with no linear time, how can we still have motion? The motion automatically.
Yeah, well, when there's time free, how can you have motion?
That's a big question for me. But
I'm there. Steve?
Eleanor.
Eleanor.
Oh, is it Steve? Is it Steve?
Yes, Steve.
Oh, because Eleanor,
Tony.
he said that it is going to be available on the internet.
Oh, wonderful, because, yeah, I need
All the
to-
papers will be on the internet.
Well, actually, we're live today.
Oh, okay.
Right now.
As it happens, we're live streaming, and it will be available from today on YouTube.
I thought it was a dream.
YouTube, if
They're
you
not
type
even
in
dreams.
John
They have many different
Gebser
meanings.
Society Conference
You need to let
2017
them flow and be
NYC.
open to all the possible meanings.
So are you native New Yorker? Or?
International Association of Study Dreams.
You came to the conference.
They have all kinds of techniques to help people interpret a dream. So interpretation is very limited. One,
Fantastic.
the flow of dreams.
Are you a student of that? Or
Next section is movement.
What major?
University of Philosophical Studies in Los Angeles?
I mean, that has so much. So lucky to have somebody. Married to you, then you have. Oh. Yeah, oh, really? Oh, yeah, that's.
Gebser workshops? This is your first, right? My first too. But the guy that was sitting here, this is his 18th. This is 18th.
Well, I got to know, well, what is actually his, yep, exactly, because, and when he was holding this, I have been the indigenous people actually, at the Western side. And that was fascinating, because how that happened, I really don't know. Right, because it was, David Bowie, who, quantum physics. Exactly. And in sciences, imagine now being in physics where you go down in all energy is exactly. So then he thought, well, why couldn't we use this thing? And he started his dialogue. And then it was wonderful.
We're handing these out, they're just the programs. If you haven't gotten one.
Tell us later.
Okay.
Just let it shine right through.
Yeah.
Right.
If only I could become transparent.
Right.
So yeah, welcome everybody. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. We're going to get started with the afternoon. We're going to take a break probably halfway between presentations, and I'm going to actually be bumping mine off to Sunday, which works better for me anyway, because I like to kind of take everyone's presence and kind of reflect also. I hope you can be there for that as well. So we're going to begin this afternoon with and Jesse is going to be speaking about, Jesse Shaw is going to be speaking about transparency and healing mission time.
Thank you. So nice to be here. Good afternoon. And I know we're right after lunch, so we'll try and keep it nice and upbeat. Let me just start by telling you who I am. I practice Chinese medicine. I have an acupuncture and a Chinese practice here in New York. I've been practicing for about 15 years. My undergraduate and some graduate work was in music performance, and I'm a bit of a numbers junkie. So I've got an MBA in marketing and statistics, and at the same time I have my acupuncture practice now in a quantitative research department, business publication, which I'm actually going to let that go very soon, like in just a couple of weeks, which I'm excited about. And the shift for me from coming into acupuncture came about because I had this shamanic initiation back in 1996 in Peru. And it was the real catalyst for me that changed the entire trajectory of my life. So I want to sit around with that. And then all the images and the paintings I'm going to show you as part of the presentation, it's my work. In a few instances, the photographs aren't mine, but most of it, even the photographs, they are mine. And I say that not to try and get credit, but just hopefully to make the whole experience maybe a little bit more personal and a little bit more intimate. So you'll know that piece of me that's shining up there, not just something that I pulled off the internet. From my agenda today, what I really want to talk about is I want to talk about these two ancient healing practices, acupuncture and Peruvian shamanism, that I've been working with for the past roughly 15 to 20 years. And what I want to talk about to light is their very, very deep roots that are steeped in magical and mythical consciousness, and how I believe that the kind of generative or efficient aspects of those frequencies of consciousness are so needed today to help move us into the integral and greater transparency. So in other words, it's like these two ancient realities and their ability to actually vitalize these frequencies can help people to heal. So this image I took this summer, I was in Peru, and this is at Kilaurumiak, and it's called the Rock of the Moon. And I've zoomed in on it, but it's this giant granite structure, and this is almost like the eye of it. And so when I was there this summer, and I was kind of thinking about this presentation, and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be terrific if I could make the flow of the presentation kind of be like this arc here. This is pre-Inca, and it's very old. They haven't really dated it. But, you know, I could move my conversation, you know, from archaic, magic, mythical, big mental part, of course, and then back up the side, mythical, magical, and archaic, and that it would have that kind of flow. And of course, my presentation isn't going to do that. But what I wanted to do, I thought, well, at the very least, and we'll see if this works, so forgive me if this doesn't work, but I'm going to just try it. So one of the things that I did was, this is a temple of the feminine. It's one of few in Peru. And it's got all these caves, and it's got these carvings, and it's got all these fountains and waterfalls. So I recorded the water, which hopefully is going to come up. Maybe not. There it is. And so we can kind of bring that energy in. And then I have some agua florida, and I will not force this on anyone. But if you would like to partake of it, I will give a little bit for you in your hands. And what you do, this is kind of a shamanic thing. You take a little bit in your hands. I'm going to demonstrate it. And you rub your hands together, and you clap 3 times, and then you take in the scent, just to kind of bring some smell into the room. And it might be really nice after lunch. So if anybody would like a little bit, I can just give you a little. And it's alcoholic, so it evaporates very quickly. It's a really lovely way to open a space. It opens things. It's an opening. So I wanted to start by telling you what I mean by the omission of time in the title of my talk. And most importantly, it's this idea of allowing ourselves to step back, step beyond the kind of hierarchical judging of our mental consciousness which dominates us. And so considering these ancient healing modalities, the mental would think that the people practicing them were primitives. And so in some way, very unsophisticated and unknowing. And so instead, I'd like us to be open to believing that there were things that these ancient people knew that we cannot possibly know. And I mean that know in, like, not in the mental thing, but like this broader sense of knowing something. And that when we level the playing field by doing that, by being open to believing, then we're actually allowing ourselves to have access to these other frequencies, even if we just lightly touch them, so that we expand beyond this very mental dominance that we all have in our consciousness states. And that by doing that, then it intensifies our in-the-moment consciousness. And in the case of Peruvian shamanism, in a healing ceremony there, it provides a timeless or time-full healing where past, present, and future are all simultaneously transformed. There's no time. And it also means that when I was with San Julio, who's pictured here, who's a Quechuan shaman, and he's offering a blessing to the mountains, or the sacred Apu, and it was like the closure of a 2-day ceremony and the opening of a ceremony where we were going to be working with the sacred plants, that I can stand there with trying to quiet my mental consciousness and all its questioning and skepticism and chatter, and I can allow myself just to be in the beauty of this ceremony and to trust that there's this kind of latent magicness in me that's going to get it in a cellular way. And I don't need to understand it. I can just be in the presence of it. And healing can have a lot of different meanings. But for this conversation, it's about helping people experience and amplify alternate frequencies of consciousness so that we all can make the mutational leap to the integral. And, and I say that like it's some kind of future thing, but it's in the here and now in what I refer to as fat moments. That's when I have experiences of it. And so it's like when I was here at the Silistani burial grounds, which are in close to Puna, Peru, and they date back to 800 BC, and they sit at 13,000 feet, so you're very high up. And we go there early in the morning, and we walk through town, and all the women, of course, have set up their stalls, and they're selling these beautiful, colorful, hand-woven things. So we kind of walk through that. Then we go up this road, this dirt road, walk for about a mile, and all these cholpas start appearing all over. And they're these tall, cylindrical towers where the ancient ones placed their dead. And then we come across what's called an Intihuatana stone, and it has a circle of stones around it. And the ancient ones, this was a celestial observatory for them, these stones, and they also felt that they were the center of the earth because they were lassoed to the sun. So we're there, we meditate there, and then we walk a little further and come over this hill, and this beautiful lake appears. And this lake has a stillness to it that, it's like seductive. I'm feeling a sense of calm that I've never felt before in my life. And I can look out with my eyes and I see the perspectives and the colors and the way that the clouds float as they do at 13,000 feet. And I've got these images of the ancient ones that brought their dead here. And so that to me is what a fat moment is. That to me is an experience of the integral. And, so these fat moment experiences, they're hard to describe because they're so largely experiential. But I'll try again. So it's sort of like when you see a sunrise and you can actually feel the beauty of it with your body. Or when you look at the red in a rose and you can taste its lusciousness. Or you come upon a beautiful mountain and you intuitively know that it's sacred. Or you do something like walk through the Silistani burial grounds and you start having these images come to mind that you don't know where they source from, and it's as if this place is in conversation with you. So that's what fat moments are. Now, I think that we're much in need of the intensification of the positive aspects of these states of consciousness, because what I observe in New York City is a lot of what I call neck-up living. And trust me, I'm guilty. I do neck-up living. But as you see in this picture, every single person is looking at their phone. They're all checked out. Nobody's present. And it's a kind of disembodiment where I think they're not connected with these, the positive aspects of these states of consciousness. And to the contrary, what we see is the appearance of their deficient forms. So we've got the deficient magical, which is kind of running rampant, of sort of this clannish groupthink thing like in the alt-right movement, or even like with terrorism and ISIS. And then we've also got this deficient mythical, which is everybody absorbed in their phones, binge streaming, and like posting all these imaginary Facebook lives. And so I think what the result of that is that we've got these symptoms that, one way of looking at them is that it's the magical and the mythical calling out for our attention. And those are things like chronic pain, insomnia, anxiety, depression, obesity, and addiction. So in reconsidering these ancient modalities of healing, I love this Rilke quote because he's not speaking of them directly, but it's just such a beautiful articulation. Here begins the revision of categories where something past comes again as though out of the future, something formerly accomplished is something to be completed. So let's start with acupuncture. And I know everyone is probably familiar with acupuncture, has had acupuncture. And that acupuncture that you may not know is the power of acupuncture when the magical and mythical frequencies are consciously brought into the treatment room. And the other thing that I want to say about acupuncture and not forget is that I believe, and what I'm going to try and show you, is that it's got kind of an organic integrality built into it. In homage to that magical energetic, I'm showing you a picture of a ritual bronze cauldron from the Shang dynasty, dates back to 1600 BC, and this is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York here. It's a beautiful piece, beautiful piece. So here's the mental view of acupuncture. Acupuncture is 12 major meridians, 400 plus acupuncture points. As it's taught in school to most people, traditional Chinese medicine has this idea that you needle point A and point B to fix pain C and illness D. And they really like that because it's kind of a rational, evidence-based proof of how it works. And then that also means that the insurance companies will pay for it, which is great. I mean, that's all really well and good. But the thing that kind of gets stripped out of this mental view are all those other things, such as who is the practitioner, what is the relationship between the practitioner and the patient, what is the energetic of the healing space, and what's the tone of the encounter. So, and you know, this stripping away did not start here in this country, but actually traces back to the Cultural Revolution in China. So Mao Zedong came into power in 1949. This is a government slogan from 1966 when we were kind of in the heart of the Cultural Revolution, and it reads, "Smash the four olds." And the four olds at that time were old customs, old cultures, old habits, and old ideas. And I mean, and it was pervasive across everything. I had acupuncture teachers who had grown up in China. One woman who, when she was 5, her parents were just taken out of the apartment. And because the neighbors fed her, she was able to survive. And then they, you know, made their reappearance something like 9 months later. So, and you know, and it was a period thinking, you know, if you know about the Cultural Revolution, which we all do, I mean, like 40 million people died, which was 8% of China's population at the time. You know, you had to have this deficient mental belief. And the other thing that the government did, which when I read this in Gebser, I got very excited because it's like, oh my God, that's what they did. So in 1947, this is the newspaper, a Chinese newspaper, and you can see that the orientation of the language, it's all written top down, and it goes from right to left. And they are, the characters, the traditional characters, so they're these rich allegories of what the meaning of the word is. They're like little pictures. And so then, in 1955, 1956, Mao Zedong and the government did 2 things. They simplified all the characters, so they stripped away the rich allegory, and then they turned it so that it's like English where you write from left to right. And, you know, and so Gebser talks about this. He talks about when we go from a vertical to a horizontal orientation, that is a shift in consciousness for a culture, and that the top down is a magical, mythical orientation, and that the left to right is a mental, masculine orientation. And that the left stands for kind of unconscious and unknown, and the right is wakefulness and consciousness in the sense of like right, being right versus being wrong, and as in terms of having rights, like the formation of a legal code. So that this left to right is kind of a self-imposed ordering and away from acts of God and inspiration from heaven. So we have to go back pretty far in time to really get the hang of the magical and mythical roots in Chinese medicine, which takes us back to the Shang and the Zhou dynasties, which is about 1600 through 221 BC. And the mythical, which is so lovely, appears in the 5 elements. And it's a cyclical round of the elements. Each one is associated with a season. And they were written about in the Han Dynasty, which around the 1st, 2nd century AD, but they sourced from the Zhou Dynasty that was earlier. And the beauty of this is that each one of these elements has all these correspondences. So they're associated with a yin and a yang organ, they're associated with a sound, with a smell, a taste, an emotion, and also a spirit. So, and there are not a lot of acupuncturists that use the 5 elements, but it enables both to diagnose and to treat, and you can treat physical, emotional, or spiritual using this philosophy. Okay, so I could stay here all day. I'm not going to. I'm going to take us back to mythical or magical. Now, this is, you know, it's kind of hard to find the magical because it's so far back in time, but this is the character that it's an oracle bone glyph for Ji, which is illness. And what we've got is, we've got a picture of a bed, there's a person lying on a bed, and they're surrounded by drops of blood or a lot of sweating, okay? So somebody who's really sick. And the person who did the healing of that person that was ill was the shaman. This character on the left is the oracle glyph for shaman, and I put the modern character down underneath. And so this kind of sideways H is the Chinese character for gong, like ne gong, inner work, or qi gong, working with the qi. And so scholars hypothesize, and I just love the interpretation of it, that the ancient character is two of these gong on top of each other, so that the shaman's job was to do the work of heaven and the work of earth. So it was his job to unite the two and bring the two together. And that the other character in the Wu shaman character of our modern time is this glyph for a person who's dancing. And we see a person, and they're holding two oxen tail in their hands, because oxen tail were the animals, the oxen were sacrificed frequently, and they are kind of doing this wild dancing. So I thought, let me go back and find the earliest definition that I can find of Wu, or shaman. And so I pulled it from the Zhuojiezi, which is the oldest existing dictionary. It goes back to the 2nd century AD. And I had a friend of mine who's actually well-versed in Chinese, and he translated it for me. And it's invocation, they who serve the formless, who with dance bring down the spirits, this manifests in the undulations of their flowing gowns. And then Dallas McCurley, who's a Shang scholar, wrote, the dance as it proceeded would have opened passage between earth and sky in the spinning body of the shaman, now a kinesthetic composite of extraordinary power. So I think this is one of those things that we have no way of knowing what this was. The oracle bones, I have to bring them into the picture, which is where the glyphs were sourced. Were discovered in China first in I think it was in the late 1899, and then they found this Shang civilization called Anyang, and they found 2 giant pits filled with 100,000 of these bones. So we've got like records, and what they did with these bones, they're tortoise shells and oxen scapula. They would carve holes in the back of them, and then the king, who was the shaman, and whose job it was to connect heaven and earth, he would ask a question or make a charge, and they would take a hot stick and they would poke it in the back of these bones, and then they would listen for the cracking sound. So it was like the bones were speaking to them in their response. And they would also look at the cracks, and so from there they would determine what the prognostication was, and then they would write those on the front of the shells. And the shells tell us that at that time the treatments for illness, and this I'll group all this back toward the end here, were incantation, exorcism, ritual sacrifice, and then they also found pointed stones and bone needles. So, so just to kind of summarize this piece about acupuncture and magic, so we can kind of see singing and chanting. They also had these magnificent bronze bells that they used, ecstatic dancing to bring down the spirits from the heavens, these piercing of the body with these bones and these stones, and then ritual, all ritualized, and often sacrifice both of humans and of animals. Okay, so that's that view. Now, the thing that's really cool about Peruvian shamanism is that it avails us of some access to this magical frequency in the here and now. We don't have to just imagine it like we have just imagined it as I presented it, but we can actually go and experience it. So this is an image of my shamanic teacher who I've been working with for the past 10 years. He lives in Cusco. This is his Hualtaco staff, and this Hualtaco staff is 2,500 years old. It's been passed down from one shaman to another, and it is of the magic realm, and it is a power object. In the way that he uses it in healing ceremony, he takes it, it's about this long, he turns it sideways, and he scrapes pernicious aberrations off of people's energy bodies. And he uses other things too. He'll use condor feathers, he uses tobacco smoke, he uses a rattle, but he tells me this is the big kahuna. It's like when there's something really big there, this is what he gets out and uses. So with Peruvian shamanism, the other piece of it is that it's about working with the sacred plants. And the two that I have familiarity with are San Pedro and ayahuasca. Now, this is a picture of my teacher. He's getting ready to cut a piece of a chuma cactus, which is San Pedro. It's going to be cooked and then used in ceremony. And San Pedro, the achuma cactus, has been used ceremonially in Peru for the past 4,000 years. They've seen ancient drawings of it in ritual spaces dating back to 2000 BC. And, you know, and what my teacher tells me about these two sacred substances is that since they are plants, they've been here throughout all mutations of consciousness. It's like they have the wisdom of all time in their cells. It's just part of them. And ayahuasca, which has been used ceremonially for as long, if not longer, is also part. Now, ayahuasca is the most sacred of the sacred plants. Ayahuasca is referred to as the Great Mother. And ayahuasca is a Quechuan word that aya means dead or soul, and huasca means vine. And I found it really totally fascinating when I was reading Gebser, and he talks about the two souls. And he writes that only the journey through the zones of life and death in one soul, only this literal experience enables the individual in some way to gain the living knowledge of what we have described as the biunity of the soul. And then he shows the Tai Chi symbol as the symbol for this biunity of the soul. So we've got the dark, the death soul on the right, and we've got the living soul on the left, and they're antitheses. They are not antitheses, they are complements. So you cannot have one without the other. It's a biunity. And just to remind us, the Tai Chi symbol, whenever we get to the fullness of one, we get the reminder dot of the other in it. It's like, oh, no, these both go together. And so, you know, I think about this, the ayahuasca being the vine of death, and that we're not talking about death and destruction. What we're talking about is a shelter and a refuge for contemplation about life and for paths to healing. And I believe that that's why that there's a number of sacred substances that they're being lit up right now almost as if they're cosmic keys that are here to help us make the big shift. And so I think it's why ayahuasca is much more in the public conversation. I think it's why psilocybin is being used for palliative care, and why things like ibogaine and the secretions of the Sonoran desert toad are being used effectively to treat crack cocaine and heroin addiction. And so in terms of fat moments and working with shaman and all of this, I thought the best way that I could bring it to life for you would be just to read a couple of short passages from a book that I published recently. And what I'm going to read you is, and then I'll summarize and we'll be good to go here. But what I want to read you, I went over there. This was when I first met him, and it was the first healing that I had with him and the man who was assisting him. And at the time, I had a breast cancer scare, and I was going to need to come back and do all these crazy, kind of invasive Western medical tests, which I was not very excited about. But as it turns out, that never manifested. But I just want to read you a description of this healing. My name is Jessie Olive Shaw. I felt a bit awkward stating my full name as Don Mateo had just requested, using Olive as my middle name. By some uncanny coincidence, the plant had informed me the night before that it was totally appropriate to use the middle name of my great-grandmother and namesake, Jessie Olive, instead of my own. Jessie Olive had been a strong and determined woman with dark, piercing eyes. She had died of breast cancer at 41. I myself, now standing here in front of these two shamans in the jungles of Peru with breast cancer concerns, was close to that same age. Walk back, please, Don Mateo directed as I stood in front of him. Stay there. I stopped, stepping backward unsteadily as I heard his voice. The request for me to stand before Don Mateo and Jose had come as a surprise. I had considered an earlier encounter with Don Mateo to be my healing. The plant had quite literally brought me to my knees with an out-of-control flourish of unending, swirling, red and orange-colored hallucinations and what felt like the inability to take in enough oxygen. His intervention of singing over me and blowing smoke into my crown chakra had brought me back to earth. He now approached me as I stood feeling raw and somewhat vulnerable. He leaned over and whispered in my ear while softly shuffling the rattle at his side so none in the room could hear him. What do you associate with aging? He asked. At first I felt a complete loss of words. I finally collected myself and whispered back, decay, lack of vitality, and death. Do you fear aging? He queried further. Yes, greatly, I quickly responded. He nodded and walked away. I felt standing alone up there in front of them, as if I were in the center of a perfect storm. Now, however, after several minutes having passed, I was hard-pressed to continue standing. I wanted to crumple to the floor where I might assume the comfort of the fetal position. Don Mateo whispered with Jose in Spanish as he surveyed my energy body. My whole body quivered as I used the last ounce of energy I had to remain standing upright, while my hands rose of their own accord to cover my heart and lower abdomen. Both these places required protection, and the need felt so primal and instinctual that I couldn't stop clutching at my body. "Put your hands at your side," Don Mateo instructed. I did my best to comply, but the sensation that accompanied the simple downward movement of my hands overwhelmed me. "I'm going to be sick," I warned. I heard them both simultaneously respond, "We know." I absolutely hated getting sick, but this time I welcomed it gladly. I needed to throw up the fear, the decay, the death. "Get rid of everything," Jose whispered as he held my hair back from around my face. I let it all go and reeled from the exertion. As soon as I'd finished, Don Mateo began sucking things off my face and solar plexus. It was as if tentacles adhered with powerful suction cups had encased me. He pulled them off one by one and spit them out into one of the colorful plastic buckets used for vomiting. So that was my initial healing experience, and I'm just going to do one other quick passage, which is a much more lovely experience of a fat moment. On the third and final night of ceremony, the plant approached me quite differently. I felt diaphanous, almost translucent. As I began to feel the Sacred One's presence, it was hard to fathom that tonight I had drunk from the same batch of medicine that had brought me to my knees the night before. I found myself enshrined under a canopy of soft blue and purple light that formed a glowing arch over my head and enabled me to rest in a relaxed and open spectrum state. I leaned back against the wall, taking in a profound sense of well-being, and then picked up my black writing book that I had placed on the floor at my side. There in the darkness, sitting under the flowing canopy of soft light, I began writing down everything, an attempt to capture each and every nuance the plant imparted to me. I was in flow, and all that I could sense was the thoughts, images, and feelings that were moving through me. Don Mateo came by, momentarily held my face in his hands, and then began to sing a beautiful chant that I knew to be for the healing of my heart. I let the tones reverberate throughout my body and took in the full blessing of his offering. It then became an evening without thoughts, without words, a deep integration of all that had gone before. Sitting under the transmitting hues of blue and purple light, I drank up all that was present, including that which my mind could not comprehend, that which could not be written in my black writing book. Words were not possible because the essence of what was being communicated was purely a felt sense experience that was without description. So, in summary, so this is what I do with, this is how I think about states of consciousness, and I kind of combine it with the 5 elements. So, archaic to me is water, magical is wood, mythical is fire, and mental is metal. And then the earth and the integral are in the center. And I kind of think of acupuncture as going here as being a reminder of the frequency of magical and mythical. And I put ayahuasca and Peruvian shamanism as kind of the frequency and reminder of the magical and the archaic. And so when I'm in the treatment room with the patient, what I'm asking myself is, how are the states of consciousness out of balance? So if I'm thinking about the magical, it's like, is this person in their body? And if they are disembodied, how are they compensating for that in their lives? Oops, I knew I was going to do that. With the mythical, I ask myself, what stories are they telling themselves? What's the story of their life? What's the story that they're telling me? Would another story be a better story for them to hold? And what are the stories that their dreams are possibly telling them? For the mental, I'm feeling into the metal of them. Is their mental like cold and cutting as steel, or does it have more of a kind of malleable golden warmth to it? And for the archaic, I'm asking myself, does this person enter into trance states consciously? How were they delivering against their body's need for that felt sense of the archaic oneness? And is addiction fulfilling that need for them? And then thinking back to the Shang and Zhou dynasty folks, I don't know why that's doing that. Keep going. Okay. And what I'm bringing in there when I'm treating, first and foremost, I think, okay, in the body. Am I in my body? Are they in their body? Acupuncture needles are a great way to get people in their bodies and to say to them, please be quiet while you're on the table and just feel the energy moving in your body. And I'm showing you a picture of these 2 men on horses because if you've ever ridden a horse, you cannot ride a horse with your mind. Horse horse with your body, you communicate to it with your body, you direct it with your body. You have to be embodied to ride a horse. I think about ritual. I think about my treatment as being a ritual. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. I ask people about what kinds of rituals they're partaking of in their lives. Do they have a morning ritual? What other kinds of rituals are important to them? I remind myself that the how of what I do is as important as the what. So when I show this image, which may seem unrelated, but we could say the what of this picture is that she's taking the animals to the field for pasture for the day. And when you look at the image of how that's happening, here we see the llama and the sheep, and they're all they're buddies. They're all walking together, and she's got the kid slung over her back in a colorful blanket, and then the little dogs are coming along behind. So the how of things is so much richer than that description of, oh, let's go to the field. An incantation, that our words and the words that we use, the tone of our words are so important. They are like an incantation. And so what you say to people really matters, and the way in which you say it really matters, and that people's intentions are really important, and stating an intention is a really important thing. And that as an acupuncturist, I have more at my disposal than just needles and herbs, that I've also got sound, movement, and smell. So sound, you can tone, you can sing. Movement, you can dance, you can do Tai Chi, you can do Qigong, and smells, you can use aromatic essential oils, you can put flowers in your home, all of that impacts us in our health. And that evil spirits are alive and well. And using 5-element acupuncture, I can do depossession and clearing treatments, and I do, and it's helpful. And that the body, emotions, and spirits, if not totally one, they're so interconnected, which means that if I'm treating the body, I'm also treating the emotions and the spirits. Or if somebody comes in and they're having a spiritual crisis, that I'm also impacting their emotions and their physical state. And then, and so what I see, I have no evidence-based proof of how effective this works, but what I see is that people become less two-dimensional. It's like as all the states of consciousness frequencies kind of vibrate through them, they fill out and they become more multidimensional and more rounded, and and it's transparent, but they transform. So that's my presentation. Do you have any questions? Questions? Yeah.
Do we have any questions? We have a few minutes for questions.
Don't make them too hard.
Yeah.
So I noticed something in your talk that's really interesting to me, and I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that.
Can you speak up just a little bit so I hear you, please?
Yeah. So I noticed something in your talk that was really interesting to me, and I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on it. So you mentioned that practitioners of acupuncture generally take a more mental approach, and they don't necessarily use the elemental language or that kind of magic mythic approach in their practice any longer. And that's like a concern for me.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you have any ideas on healthy translation into applying the magical and mythic symbolic approach to the mental structure, and how does the magical and mythic and mental come together into being able to fully into proper scientific research?
Yeah, so a couple of answers. I mean, first off, everybody is trained in acupuncture school with, kind of this mental view of points and meridians and everything. And some schools and some people really just like to do a physical practice that just keeps it at that level. I mean, there are, just as with doctors or any kind of a healer that you deal with, there's all nature of different kinds of people, and some people are work in a far deeper way than others. So I don't want to, first of all, I don't want to mislead and say, if you go and see an acupuncturist, they're just going to treat you mentally, because it depends on the person. And I have a lot of beautiful acupuncture friends who are practitioners, and everybody's working to take their practice as deeply as they can. And part of the way that they do that is they do that by doing the work themselves, because your own vibration impacts the vibration of the people that you work with. But in terms of your second part of how you turn it into scientific proof, it's like you know, jury's out on that one. I'm not really sure, but I think that, you know, as we do try and, you know, prove the effectiveness of these various different modalities and healing orientations, that we make sure that we remember that it's not just the what of things, but it's this whole other experiential thing that is going on, you know. And even I know that, you know, in the Horizons conference that's going on next door, and there are a lot of universities that are doing some scientific testing with things like, you know, MDMA and psilocybin, and, you know, they are setting those experiments up very carefully, but they also have these protocols where there need to be 2 people in the room when this person is under the influence of this medicinal, and the room, they take into account the context of the room, and, you know, and that's a big part of their experimental setup. They make sure that it feels safe and that it's good and that there's music and the person is comfortable, you know. So I don't know if I really answered your question well, but you know, all those things are part of the equation. Yeah.
So I really enjoyed your presentation, and I enjoyed your conversation about Chinese and the switch directional, and it made me think about the fact that, and I'm sure you know this, that the temple gates are always written in the old order, right? So when you go to a temple and you try to read it, first of all, the characters will be traditional, and if you can get through that, they're backwards. I mean, in terms of what's today.
Yes.
And you know, that's a function of history. I mean, I'm surprised that in the Cultural Revolution they didn't tear down and redo them in opposite order or whatever. But it's also, to me, very Gebserian, and I'm wondering if you share this perspective, that it's this memory of a more magical time. You know, that the signs themselves, the physical order of the characters on the signs persists even today when reading and writing is done in the opposite direction.
Yes. I mean, and I totally agree. And also building on that, I mean, I did read one place that during the Cultural Revolution, they changed all the names of the street to like, you know, Get It Together, Brother Way, or, you know, something as opposed to Sacred Site, or, you know, and that they've changed all of those back. You know, so just like, let's remember this reading, and let's remember what the old names were, which is, you know, to their credit. But I mean, what a harsh thing for those people to have gone through, and, you know, when it lasted some 30 odd years. It's like, oh my goodness. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
I really enjoyed your talk. I especially liked, I really perked up when you talked about, you recognized the healthy, maybe I'm paraphrasing, the healthy archaic, when a person can enter into a trance consciously.
Yes.
And I was just wondering about the efficient use of trance and the deficient mode, which I see very, like in our use of our devices, you know, the TV trance, which is almost epidemic in our society.
It is.
And also connecting that to what you mentioned earlier about dispossession, and evil is alive and well. So I was wondering if you could, maybe out of what I've just mentioned, find something that's useful for you to articulate or elaborate a little bit, because I think there's a connection there. I haven't quite made it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was funny. I had shared this presentation with my mentor, my acupuncture mentor, who was the one that had introduced me to Gebser in the first place. And she was, and you know how I talked about the deficient forms of the magical and mythical, and she said, oh my God, you know, they're just so addictive, aren't they? You know, they're so addictive. But the thing about, you know, entering trance states knowingly, I mean, I believe, and this was also came from another teacher of mine who was a protege of Milton Erickson's, and his whole thing is that you have to go into trance. Like the body and the psyche and the spirit needs it, and so you're going to do it some way. So, you know, so better to find some kind of an efficient way to go into trance than to not have that knowledge and knowing and then have some trance state kind of overtake you, whether it's getting drunk every night or it's binge watching TV every night, or, You know, so, you know, and maybe that's a meditative practice of some sort, or, you know, I mean, one of the ways I do it is I walk for miles every day, because it's very soothing to me. So, you know, I just think you have to kind of, you've got to, a lot of this is just having like conscious intention about things, and we're all going to screw up, of course, but you just kind of keep that coming back and trying to have a conscious intention about what you're up to, and like kind of like you know, it's sort of like the art of living. Like, what is the artistry of your life and how you're playing it out? That's sort of how I think about it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
So Judy Gardner is our next presenter, and she will be presenting on From Fragmentation to Wholeness as Seen Through the Collective Unconscious. But Jeremy just disappeared. He was going to give you your formal...
He's right there. He's at that door.
Oh, Jeremy, could you give us our formal presentation for Judy, please? For her biography. For Judy's biography.
Do we have?
Last year,
You're on the internet in my iCloud account.
Tell them whether she's gone, I forgot.
We have the file on here, right? Or is it still on the drive? This drive.
Sorry, we had downloaded it and now it disappeared.
It's there.
Quick start.
It's there in the ethereal.
We opened it earlier, everybody. It does exist.
Maybe
The question before somebody else, does transparency still have movement?
Does transparency move? Sure, I would think so.
I downloaded it too.
Things are transparent when there is not no sense anymore.
That was the other first presentation. That one's
The
keynote.
way I interpret it, it's an unfolding. And now
Remember the name of the app?
transparent. Transgender.
The bottom one. Double click the bottom one.
Thank you, Steve.
We're good. We're okay, no emergencies. Continuing as usual.
You look like a race car driver, Jeremy. You got the various things on
Oh,
your shirt
yeah.
now. Sponsored by.
Okay, Judy, it was the fourth one, right?
With the NASCAR.
There we are.
Yay! And it's the right one.
Did you already introduce her? Should I just mention?
I gotta tape down this line here.
I have it actually.
People have to walk
Should I just jump out of this?
Yeah, you can close out of that.
go
It's not
to the
necessary.
side.
We can go into full screen or slideshow.
Up at the top,
Yeah.
slideshow.
There we go.
Mm.
There you go.
There we
Yay.
are.
Here we are.
It's all interconnected.
Oh no.
Lisa just, you know, invited me. And you live in Lisa, it's all a virtuous circle.
Had it open. Here we are. Okay. So I'd like to welcome our next presenter, Judy Gardner. Judy Gardner is a consciousness researcher, speaker, and author whose dream studies expand the potential for groundbreaking scientific, spiritual discovery, and psychosocial epiphany. This is explicated in her book, Lavender, An Entwined Adventure in Science and Spirit. Her cosmic dreaming theory, which describes a dimension of dreaming analogous to the Jungian collective unconscious, has been presented at universities in the US and Europe. Collaboration with the late Montague Ullman, psychiatrist and neurologist, led to a bidirectional theory of dreaming, which augments the relationship of personal concerns with cosmic events, mirroring a worldview of wholeness and community. Judy is a member of IASD, the Ryan Research Center, Foundations of Mind, and literary executor of Dr. Ullman's archives. She is on the scientific committee of eleogenetics, I think I'm saying that correctly, derived from two ancient Greek words, eleos meaning mercy and genesis meaning origin and development. Eleogenetics studies the process of creating and facilitating the emergence of mercy, namely compassion. And welcome,
Cool.
Judy. This is your talk, From Fragmentation to Wholeness as Seen Through the Collective Unconscious. Thank you for joining us.
Well, we made it. Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy and Sabrina. And thank you for introducing me, Glenn, to these lovely people at Gebser. It's a pleasure to be here today. Okay, so I'm going to be operating this?
Yes.
Want someone else to?
You just
Oh, okay. I
see this arrow, just push that arrow.
Okay, but they'll only see this, not my notes.
Correct. Or you could just do it this way if you want, just push here.
Oh, okay, but this arrow will take me forward.
Yeah.
And this will take me there.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, so this is a step-by-step experience of the collective unconscious, which will hopefully shed light on the transparent nature of waking and dreaming consciousness. Good. So we begin here with Maslow's theory of self-actualization, and then we progress to Jung's collective unconscious, and ultimately to Montague Ullman's species connectedness. My late partner and colleague, Montague Ullman, expanded dream work beyond the consulting room out into the community so that dreamers could have a shared experience, which he referred to as species connectedness. This hierarchy was inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, but it also features on Ullman's process from the biological to the psychological to the social and to the spiritual or transpersonal realm, which I also refer to as cosmic. So in ascending to a higher consciousness, we augment concern for survival of self with survival of the species, which I believe will speak to the integrality of Gebser's concepts. And here is where we transition from a microscopic personal worldview to a macroscopic transpersonal. Jung wrote, in addition to personal consciousness, there's a second psychic system, a collective universal and impersonal nature identical in all individuals. This was my experience through dreaming, not through waking. So now we begin the journey. The relationship of these four historical figures shows connections across time to interlinking and interdependent events. And this is how I arrived at the collective unconscious in my dreams. Galen and Ptolemy taught me to see the light. Steno and Curie showed me the inner workings of the earth. These four spirit mentors visited my dreams one by one, symbol by symbol, over 2 decades, none of it making any sense. I had no background in any of these sciences, so this was all Greek to me. Individually and collectively, they issued a dire ecological and environmental warning to humankind. At journey's end, I realized that the collective unconscious was teaching the integrality of consciousness and humankind's connection to the planet and beyond. I like this slide a lot. It's off-center, but I still like it. This is my transparency slide. So as vision and light led the way, I sensed that the dream mentors were using light as the transmission medium. There were countless messages that coupled light and the optic system, and that gave me pause. And now this is what Jung might refer to as creative chaos, where these fragments are demanding connection, and they were messaged by the 4 spirit mentors that you had just seen. So take note here that each mentor was represented by multiple dream images, symbols, relevant to their work on Earth. Examples are illustrated in the forthcoming presentation. And I might add that with the exception of Marie Curie, who everyone knows about, I was really quite unfamiliar with the other 3 mentors. So beginning in 1993, these dreams inundated me with a range of sciences, none that I had studied other than a year of zoology. I dissected a frog. That's my memory of it. The unmarked lavender piece in the center, well, it was initially unmarked, was a mystery piece for many years, but it would come to represent my birth mother, who was nurturing, like Mother Earth, but exhibited explosive, eruptive behavior. This reminds me of John Mitchell's talk. This is where the transition from personal began augmenting to transpersonal. The dream language translated to, in geology, tectonic plates, seafloor spreading, subduction zones, hot spots, joining with gases and metals and minerals. As the warnings accelerated, geology and chemistry took second stage because there was obviously a greater need at the time, well, certainly even now, to pay attention to the Earth. So as light and vision, which was represented by astronomy and optics, would have to wait. And even though this is David Bohm's quote, I really married it, I like it, with integrality. The task of science is to start with such parts and to derive all wholes through abstraction explaining them as the result of the interaction of the parts. There are 3 points I hope that you take away from this talk. 1, the transparent nature of dreaming. 2, the underlying unity in dreams. And 3, the spiritual nature of the collective unconscious in the dream state. Now, Montague Ullman's contributions to dream work analogize the nature of dreaming consciousness to David Bohm's theory of a seamless whole, out of which the explicate order arises. So that you can see in the top portion of the slide is the implicate order, which includes dreaming, and that dreams can open up our remote memory bank and free us from time and space. The bottom part of the slide is the explicate order, and that is where the dream content is triggered by unresolved feelings rising to the surface. And in the center is what Monty called as the relay station, where dreaming consciousness functions as a relay station, receiving input from both orders, pointing us toward wholeness. I think I missed a mentor. 1 second. Oh, no, this is right. So reaching back to the 2nd century, the first 2 mentors were represented by the 2 Claudiuses. Even though you had seen them before, I think it's important to note who they were and what they did, although most of you probably know. But in my dream experience, Galen was my connection to vision and the optic nerve, and Ptolemy brought to my attention the refraction of light. Now, the Greek writing that you see under Galen's portrait was the first of a string of electronic codes inserted on my computer. I was puzzled by this method of encryption, but I began to realize over time that when this Greek lettering and other symbols would appear, it was always calling my attention to something that was really relevant and significant at that time. So that's when I began to decipher this coding using the tools of repetition, connection, and association. My first dream associated with Ptolemy was hidden in a word number puzzle. Mm-hmm. The dream said optico, spelled O-P-T-I-C-O, with pages numbered 16 through 21. And this is a good example of the coding and the deciphering that takes place in a dream. Well, it turns out that Ptolemy wrote 5 books entitled Optica, O-P-T-I-C-A, with pages numbered, on the refraction of light in celestial bodies. Years after this dream, the page numbers were revealed as chemical elements found in supernova explosions. Sulfur, chlorine, argon, potassium, calcium, and scandium, which is a byproduct of uranium. So Galen and Ptolemy were my lead spirits in light, and they had emerged in illumined consciousness, in my case, which led to convergent vision. Those were words that I actually received in a dream, convergent vision. An ability to merge the invisible with the visible, to integrate dreaming and waking across space and time. So now begins the first dream, which came through on 11/11/1994. A deceased friend, a Uranian astrologer, had appeared in a dream, and he said he was working on a breakthrough for mankind, the optic nerve. That dream image was described as a key ring, and the message in the dream was the same key fit all 6 apartments. Well, the key, but no one knows it. That was also part of that message. No one knows it. So the keys came to represent the 5 senses, which you see at the bottom of the screen. Vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. But what was the 6th? Well, I learned sometime after the dream, I did a lot of research, that Galen regarded the cerebral spirit, or pneuma, as the active agent of all sensory organs. Now on the left we have images on the retina that are upside down. On the right, after the brain receives the signals from the optic nerve fibers, the images are on the right side up. And I'll just inject a note here that scientists are currently researching the retina using electrical signals as photons of light, which control brain activity. So this is an example of integrality, right? As above, so below. Because what you see on the left is my hand-drawn images of dream bricks, and on the right was when I took a trip to Newfoundland, and one of the first places I visited was a place called, a little village called Placentia, and you can see that it's the same configuration, but it's upside down. And this is a sample of many dreams that were showing me this. And then I questioned, well, are we receiving a spiritual frequency of light when we dream? And it took me to the Emerald Tablet, as above, so below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. So back to Ptolemy. Now here is a dream, a piece of a dream, where I dreamt a grid, which is a cluster of lights. And in it, I said it's a way to communicate. I had no idea at the time that I was being guided. And then if you look at the dream image on the left, those are my very uneven little circles. And on the right was Ptolemy's actual star cluster, which is M7 in Scorpio. And that was leading me deeper into refraction of light.
Those are clouds.
Those are clouds?
Clouds.
And then I realized that I felt, I should say, that Jung's work and so forth was playing a very large part in this. And because there was so much emphasis throughout the experience on light transformation and alchemy, these were some of his thoughts. So light had made itself known, but this was a precursor to what would follow, and that was geology and chemistry. So my geology mentor was Nicholas Steno, known as the father of geology, and Marie Curie, known for so many things, but radioactivity was definitely played a major part in this story. There's another dream. Someone says, "Are you an alchemist?" And the little dreamer over there says, "I'm in real estate and I'm an alchemist." People here do more than one thing. No, I might. The drawings you see on the left and on the right were as they are here, but the word curium had not developed because I didn't even know what CM was. Only learned that it is curium, which is an isotope, half-life of 9,700 years. And as I continued on this journey, I was asking, well, why would it be pointing to this particular isotope? Well, it turns out that curium adheres to the soil. And so that was taking me back to geology. So you can see over a period of time and recording and research that it was beginning to cohere. I also learned that curium is unusual in that it decays by spontaneous fission, a form of radioactive decay, probably present in uranium ores. And now we have a lot more uranium coming our way here. So gases had permeated my dreams: chlorine, fluorine, radon, helium. Then came metals. These figures, these upside down, what I thought were J's, turned out to be bismuth, which I saw a few days after I had the dream in a mining museum. And all of these metals, the bismuth, the uranium, and the curium, all related to Madame Curie. Also, bismuth decays into polonium, which Marie Curie named for Poland. And then there were repeating dreams of urine on my mother's floors, mashed potatoes on my mother's floors. Now, my mother was a clean freak. I mean, you couldn't find a speck of anything on her floor, much less urine and mashed potatoes. So urine became shorthand for uranium, and that led to Curie's discoveries of radium and polonium. And well, there were very strange things that I thought were very personal to me. Like I had one dream where I had a fever in my rectum, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to see a proctologist. I mean, why would I be dreaming of fever in my rectum? And later I learned that it was in the fever in the bowels, the heat, the radioactive decay in the bowels of the earth.
Wow.
So radioactive decay, well, I'll continue on here. Repetitive dreams, something new, something new, something new. Well, it required attention. And I finally came to think this might be pointing me to a sulfurous gas, an alchemical transmutation, and back to radioactive decay again. So nearly every conceivable earth disaster flooded my dreams. Here I've dreamed a shield on my toe, matching a shield volcano, as well as the Canadian shield, which I had visited while I was in Canada. And let's see what else. of Krakatoa. Yeah. I had a dream of a cracked toenail. I was checking out my toenails. My toenails look fine. Well, it was Krakatoa. An 1883 volcanic eruption in Indonesia. So the title of my book is Lavender, and it translates to lava under, which is the symbol for a volcano. I'm not trying to sell a book, that's just part of what the story is, because it did turn into a book. Okay. Now along comes Stenopad.
There you go.
You got it? Oh, Stenopad. That's what you said at lunch. Okay. Stenopad. And a colorless rose. And what would they be doing in one dream? Well, as it turns out, the steno I translated to celestial dictation. The colorless rose was interesting because I've never seen a colorless rose. But there is rose quartz, which is colorless, and I was into rocks and minerals then. And then I learned that there was something called piezoelectricity, which came through in other symbols, resulting from stress. And then I had to ask the question, did piezoelectric effects in quartz-bearing rock cause ruptures in earthquakes and volcanoes, and even possibly the spreading of these tectonic plates? Now what is curious is that Steno's study of quartz eventually led to the Curie brothers' discovery of piezoelectric properties in quartz. And that goes back to 1880. Steno lived in the 17th century. So the continuity of time and space is repeated. Oh, tell me. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay. So, I started to get interested in quantum physics, which is part of the experience, but not enumerated here, except for bone. And I found that in trying to make sense of this, trying to create a structure, I was doing something called visual associative recognition memory. And this is just a very, very simple 6-step process where, I started with the visual memory, how it stores those dream codes, if you remember your dreams. And then something else would come along, and then there would be recognition, and then the association would kick in. And then I found that the memory is pretty amazing because it then is able to retrieve previous cues that were automatically encoded and activated by a corresponding word or image. And then came the entangled state, when 2 words and images become associated within a new context. That was exciting because that looked like it was really going somewhere. And then ultimately the cue words and images organize into 2 non-separable entities or themes, simultaneously activating the entire associative structure, to end with the idea that memory forms an interrelated web of relationships. And this will give you an example of how non-separable entities are formed. It's very simple. It began with the birth mother, And then came all the dreams about the earth. We put those together and I had Mother Earth. So birth mother, earth, equal Mother Earth. And then the plates. Well, the plates were mysterious because I had dinner plates, baseball plates, x-ray plates, breast plates, tectonic plates. I had no idea why. I had my dreams were just telling me I needed to serve a big dinner or something. I mean, why so many plates? And then I realized if I put the plate together with the earth, I associated those two, then I had plate tectonics as another non-separable entity. Yeah, I was really happy when this happened. Okay, so now, well, this is just a quick synopsis of moving from fragmentation to wholeness. And I titled it Science in Spirit and Alchemical Union because I believe that Jung believes that the transformation, the alchemical transformation, begins with the soul. And it was coming to me through spirit. All of this science was coming through spirit. And so this will show you what on the left-hand side were the symbols, some of which you saw, the scientific referent or interpretation is the center section, and the fragmented subsets on the right-hand side were the components that were leading to an alchemical interaction occurring within the earth. And you know, there is so much in all of this about earth and fire and water and the natural elements. Jeremy had asked if there was a way that this could be translated to poetry. And I found a very old poem, which I have no idea who wrote it, but it was from an unpublished manuscript. And of course you can see it for yourself, how earth and fire and water are dominant. And then I learned that planetary scaled phenomenon requiring respects for the elements has been expressed since 3200 BC. And I'm sure there are many, many, many poems and works that I haven't found yet. So now we come to the phenomenological implications of transparency. And all of these were at work. The retrocognition, in that our dreams can look backward and forward simultaneously. It shows a bidirectional component that dreams can reach a broader domain. And that suggests that the telepathic dream spans across space, and the pre- and retrocognitive dreams span across time. And as for clairvoyance, I would have to think that there was a measure of that, but I can't really enumerate on it other than to say that I had some dreams that actually did manifest, but that would be more in the precognitive area. And now, this is not the whole picture, but it's as much as I could fit on a slide. And you can see that it takes in a lot of the mythological. And the question is, how did this happen? I can say this, that it shaped my theory that the fragmentary nature of dreams seeks wholeness, deriving from the collective unconscious. And I think it's worth noting that it all began with a stream of personal dreams, which I thought were personal, until they weren't, or until they merged, until they cohered. And I'm now reminded of a quote from Carl Jung: "The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution." And this is only a part of it, a tiny part. So I like this a lot. The light of the body is the eye. And this was a dream, 1994. I hadn't even started decoding them at that point. But it was interesting that I drew that circle of light around the White House, but outside of it. And there's the blind spot. See, you see how there's yellow there, and then there's white, there's nothing? Mm-hmm. But the dreamer's saying, I can see light. So she's saying, I can see light, but it's not there. So since the 17th century, the philosophy of visual spirit has been replaced with electricity traveling along nerve fibers, and Galen's theory of a luminous pneuma being carried in the optic nerves endures with some new insights. Energy molecules and hormone receptors hadn't been discovered in the 2nd century. And to this day, the blind spot has been ignored. The language of our dreams is a lost knowledge, but slowly being rediscovered. And the dreams I've shared and the pathways they lead to may be reminding us of that. And so I hope that this talk has given you a glimpse into the underlying unity in dreams and possibly unseen behavior within the earth affected by climate change and the ecological crises. And thank you for listening.
So do we have any questions? We have maybe 5 minutes or so for questions.
Judy, thank you for your vulnerability in sharing this extremely intimate process that is so unique. I have experienced many people who have been able to step consciously in this translation between these like physiological processes that make life, that are connected to the larger life dynamics of the living world, translated into images in the head as much as the subconscious can read that, and then in your conscious mind being able to connect those dots. So you're a great translator between the 3 levels.
I'm a secretary.
Nothing could exist without secretaries.
Well, you're a great secretary.
So I read something really interesting a few weeks ago in the Ann Journal, and it was written by a psychoanalyst in Los Angeles. And they've been doing some recent dream research studies in the dream labs, measuring brainwave frequencies while people are sleeping. And then they took these same subjects and they did these linguistic games with them. And this is what they concluded. But those people who had spent a lot of time in the course of their sleep at night in the REM mode had extraordinary facility in creating, in synthesizing 3 words into one concept. For example, I say the word brown, hot, and gravity. So that's an obvious one because everybody knows it's going to be sun, right? I just can't like pull anything up right now. So they were given these 3 sets, these 3 categories, and they'd have to find how those 3 things are synthesized into one thing. And unanimously across the board, those who had very strong active REM sequences had incredible ability to link the dots, connect the dots, to create sense, to make meaning. And those who spent very little time in REM mode had very great difficulty in making sense of fragments. And so, in other words, more deeply, those who spent time in REM processes were able to access the gestalt of a collection of things. They could get into the gestalt of the world. And so it made me think, well, REM, that's just chaos. When we're in REM mode, like the brainwave frequencies go up and down, blood pulse goes up and down, heart rate goes up and down, temperatures go up and down. It's the biggest, we have the most variety of inconsistent activity that we can't like hold on to when we're in REM. And so, in a way, when we enter the physiological chaos of the body, we are simultaneously creating the tools for the conscious mind to create order. And so it made me realize, wow, we really, the mythical and the mental are not so separate. That in their efficient spaces, they are supporting and nourishing one another.
Yes.
And you really your examples really are bringing this home for me.
Thank you.
And it makes me think of Parmenides, his great gift to us. We look at him as the origin of logic of the Western world. And Peter Kingsley shows us so clearly we have so misinterpreted Parmenides. And he clearly was not causal, and he clearly was trying to help us to understand how to enter the gestalt like you're doing. He was trying to teach us what you're doing. And his lesson to us was learn to sleep when you're awake and learn to be awake when you're sleeping.
That's right. That's
and so
perfect.
The example that you bring to the Gebserian context is so important because it helps us to see that we cannot layer like a lasagna these structures of awareness. They are completely intertwined. And what are the individual ways we each come to concretize each structure so we do have a full integral experience? Because Gebser says very clearly, integrality does not mean we are simultaneously looking through all three worlds. He says, integrality occurs when we concretize that structure and we have a disposition. We acquire a disposition in the physicality of the body, which becomes a point of emphasis. And in the integral experience, we navigate to a subject through the facility of all these 3 different points of emphasis, these 3 dispositions. We are allowed to consolidate the 3 dispositions.
Interesting.
And that's really what you have, on my feeling, that you have in your personal path. You found your way to pull that together.
Thank you. It's so interesting because when we leave, we never really leave the personal. This is an extension of it into the transpersonal. So that there is this unity, and it is, I have to say, transformational. My life completely changed once I realized what was happening. Completely changed.
I have something I want to say. That was very beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's very. Well, it's a great blessing to hear your incredible personal experience, the way that you put this together. Real succinctly, I just, what you do, the way that you have, noticed how the personal is enfolded in the collective, in the transpersonal, is very beautiful, very inspiring, and the way that things fall together in dreams, is beautiful and inspiring as well. And it reminds me of one of the best things I ever heard from a native elder, Topasanikwa Canoe, when we were talking about time, nonlinear time, and he just said that it's really, time is nothing to do with lines. It actually has to do with what kinds of things want to happen together, and that seems like what you're experiencing. You and because you're open to it, it's just this beautiful connections form between what kinds of things want to happen together, and the way you innocently began this project, became immersed in, like you said, you couldn't fit it all on one slide, like you were already like into 12 disciplines, in the academic world and beyond. But everything was flowing together in this transpersonal and trans time, and you're embodying Gebser, which I'm not using the Gebserian language that Sabrina just elegantly gave, but you're really a great example for all of us. So
Thank you, Glenn. And I don't know if you were at the conference where I did consciousness beyond constraint. Consciousness without constraint.
No.
Is, I think, what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, I had nothing to box anything in. As a matter of fact, the original title of the book was A Blank Page.
A blank page?
A blank page.
Oh. Okay.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Move on. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for helping. I have to turn it off before I take it out. I'll give it to you afterwards. Okay.
That's great.
Okay, y'all, you're going to look into my private email now for a moment as I pull it.
Never heard of this mouth before. Yeah. And we should walk.
It's going to take some time to download. 10 seconds, 9, 7. Are you going to, you need space?
I'll just pull something.
Okay, no, because I'll just move. You don't need this? You don't need to move the PowerPoint?
No, I do.
Okay.
I was going to use my computer to do it, but
You'll just do it off of this.
okay.
So you won't need the computer.
Right.
To
Maybe this will be not to fix, right? It will be make it transparent.
Fire and the rose are one.
We're ready.
Jeremy.
Okay.
That's all right. I can introduce myself. It should be in there somewhere, but I can.
Thanks, I mean, pretty basic. I try to hold on to beautiful pens when I end up. I have one with the, that you actually use the ink. I love them. Yeah.
Amazing.
I really love them. I have one.
So are you all set?
Okay.
So next up, we have Brant Stickley, and this is called The Fire and the Rose Are One, Diaphaneity and the Phenomenology of Fire. Welcome, Brant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as it happens, I'm also an acupuncturist and Chinese herbalist. And I would dare say that I teach at the school that of all schools is the least, training the least mental practitioners of them all, partly because of our intense focus on the classical models and adhering to the classical models. That being said, I may allude in some way to Chinese medicine, but the talk itself is not so much about Chinese medicine, per se. There is we have here the final stanza of Eliot's, of the last poem in Eliot's 4 quartets, which reads, "Quick now, here, now, always, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, when the tongues of flames are enfolded into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one." Gebser and Aurobindo, who both are the subjects of this talk, co-subjects, both praised Eliot as an example of an integral poet. And here we have a very clear expression thereof. This started with a question, and started with a bit of synchronicity. So we know that Gebser's encounter with the integral yoga and with the concepts and philosophy of Taoism sparked a recognition of the tinder that these systems might provide for the dawn of the integral consciousness. And at the same time, he wrote later that he felt that perhaps all of his work, when he became acquainted with Aurobindo's work, and in fact visited the ashram, the Aurobindo ashram, that all of his work was in some way a resonance with a spiritual force that he perceived to be emanating from Aurobindo. Now, that is a profound insight. And that is a profound expression of humility. At the same time, however, we know that Aurobindo was in fact conducting, through decades, experiments well documented in his text the record of yoga, articulated in his work The Synthesis of Yoga, and further elaborated in his magnum opus, The Life Divine.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that there were basically two forces that Aurobindo was very purposefully developing. And he perceived these as siddhis, as perfections that were tangible results of meditative practice. Those two are called Vapti and Trikaldrishti. Trikaldrishti means the vision of 3 times, meaning past, present, and future, all held in a diaphanous whole, seen simultaneously, expressing duration. And Vyapti is literally the capacity for emanating spiritual force widely. Other of Aurobindo's experiments, which he documented, involved literally intervening in world events, most famously during World War II, stymieing Nazi activity at Dunkirk through what he termed the express exercise of his spiritual force. So in the context of his integral yoga, it could not be put any more clearly. The object of yoga is to raise the human being from the consciousness of the ordinary mind, subject to the control of vital and material nature, limited wholly by birth and death and time, and the needs and desires of the mind, life, and body, to the consciousness of the spirit, free in itself, using the circumstances of mind, life, and body as admitted or self-chosen and self-figuring determinations of the spirit, using them in a free self-knowledge, a free will and power of being, a free delight of being. Then we find a similar expression directly from Gebser. It is the task of this work to serve toward this liberation, which can be completed only via the awakening consciousness of the spiritual, and we might add, this is not a question of being right, but of being true. This is a greater demand than the mentally conditioned desire to be right, which is moreover patriarchal and egocentric. Now this list, I will try to point out the emphases I wish to articulate, but this is page 361 to 362, in which Gebser outlines the characteristics of the aperspectival consciousness. Among them, consistently, one of them will become more prominent to my questioning. So we have the whole, integrity, transparency, diaphaneity, the spiritual, the supersession of ego, the realization of timelessness, realization of temporicity, realization of the concept of time, time freedom, moving beyond the merely systematic, beyond the mental rational. The incursion of a dynamics paired with the recognition of energy, the mastery of movement, the fourth dimension, the supersession of patriarchy, the renunciation of dominance and power, the acquisition of intensity, clarity, instead of mere wakefulness, and the transformation of the creative inceptual basis. Parallel to this, we find this Shu Fan Chung, who in fact would have been at the ashram when Aurobindo visited, but this is not a documented fact. He was a Chinese national who came to live in the Aurobindo ashram. And in a letter to a seeker, he said, if you want the Taoist experience, all you have to do is come here and live at the Aurobindo ashram. You will have the realization of Lao Tzu's philosophy. So I began to question, what is another example of a what is another example of an expression of this same force that we perceive traveling from Aurobindo to Europe to make contact with Gebser through space, and at the same time traveling through time to connect back to the very, as this saying it goes, to lock eyebrows with Lao Tzu, to move through space and time simultaneously. And an example comes to hand, and that is also mirrored directly in pivotal experiences of Aurobindo's when he began to review the Vedas, the Rig Veda especially. And central to the Vedic conception is the Homa ritual, the fire sacrifice and the fire ritual. So I began to think of this movement of Vyapti and Trikaldrishti as an expression of fire, catching, spreading, kindling. And to hand we have the hexagram, or the trigram Li, which is associated with fire. And I wish to call your attention that in the middle of these two yang lines, we have a yin line. And this is extremely important to our understanding of how this relates. So, what is that? The bright omen, the spirit of fire, light, warmth, magical power of awareness, a shape-shifting bird with brilliant plumage. Radiance acts through the heart, masters the organs. It is the home of the spirit. It is the locus of inspiration from heaven that can settle into the heart of humans. It provides inspiration, and yet it also, through its fire, provides the capacity to transform those inspirations. Likewise, commands the pathways of the blood, brings the spark of life, and offers a quiet center in which the spirit finds voice. Here we find one of Aurobindo's translations from the Vedas. O fire, thou art born with thy lights, flaming out on us in thy effulgence. Thou art born from the waters and around the stone. Thou art born from the forests and born from the plants of the earth. Pure art thou in thy birth, O master of man and his race. And so these are the words that accompany the fire sacrifice in the Vedic context. Aurobindo, in his study of the Vedas, contrasted both Western scholarship and more traditional Hindu scholarship to recognize what he termed the psychology of the text. But we must recognize that Aurobindo's psychology is not a psychology as we understand it in modern terms. It is a psychology which is indeed a cosmology. And it's a psychology and a cosmology all the way down. So he's able to say sacrifice means an inner offering to the divine. The real spiritual sacrifice is a very joyful thing. And sacrifice depends on the inner attitude. If one has nothing outward to sacrifice, one has always oneself to give. This is an image of the total transformation. And it's also very imperative to note that his interpretation of the Veda stemmed directly from his recognition of his own experience, his phenomenological experience of his meditative process being reflected back to him through the writing of the Vedas. And that was the key that opened the door to his understanding. Homa, however, was not just limited to the Vedic sphere. In fact, Homa is an example of a fire sacrifice. This is a Shingon Homa being practiced in Japan, and it admits of what we call the longue durée, which means that simultaneously, as does most ritual, it carries a great deal of conservatism. It carries a great deal of traditional, even down to the level of syntax. It has continuity. And yet, at the same time, in every single place that it moves, so moving from India, taken up by the tantric flourishing in the 8th or 9th century, transmitted to China, and then from China to Japan. There are continuities we can perceive, but there are also changes that we can observe. So what is it? The Homa is a votive offering involving the construction of a fire in a hearth altar and the immolation of offerings in the fire. When this became taken up as a tantric ritual, the practitioner is also ritually identified with both the deity and the fire. The offerings made into the fire are the spiritual obstacles that impede the practitioner from full awakening. And the practitioner's own inherent wisdom is identified with the fire. Just as the offerings are transformed and purified, the practitioner's own obstacles are as well. So we can identify that each of these fire rituals has a basic fivefold structure: purifying, constructing, encountering, identifying, and dissociating. Dissociating actually means recapitulating it in reverse. So, purifying. In the words of Gebser, the grand and painful path of consciousness emergence, or more appropriately, the unfolding and intensification of consciousness, manifests itself as an increasingly intense luminescence of the spiritual in man. This accords well with the role of Fudo Myo-o. So, the first activity of the Homa is to recognize the purity within and without, and that all experience is pure by nature. And this is personified in Japanese, Fudo Myo-o, in Sanskrit, Akalanatha, and also that is an epithet for Shiva himself. So Fudo Myo is a manifestation of the purifying fire. In our times, this reflects that it is through the influx of this creative, communicative dawning of the integral consciousness that actually the fire will infuse into the metal. So similar to what we saw before, fire generates earth but controls metal. Now, the organization according to 5, which is articulated as the 5 phases, is one way to perceive that. We have fire always in the south, as the Chinese view it, water always in the north, wood in the east, metal in the west, earth in the center. But we can also understand this as having a quality of movement. And in that case, when it's viewed as having a quality of movement, this is appropriately termed the number 6. This is 6 expressions. And in that instance, the fire necessarily flows into the metal, which is the down-bearing quality associated with the 6 conformations. The next phase is the structuring of the altar. And we're taking this earth as our altar. Here you see from 200 million years ago, the post-Pangean land mass comprised of Laurasia and Gondwana. Laurasia comprises Europe, Asia, North America, and Gondwana, Africa, and Australia, roughly, and the Pacific. And this separated about 200 million years ago. In his book on the origins of the world's mythologies, the author Michael Witzel proposes this concept of a Laurasian narrative, that the first appearance of mythology can be traced not through a process of diffusion and not through an explanation from a psychological perspective of archetypes, but can be literally traced from Laurasian roots as it spread inexorably with the migration of human populations. So it's not that it was transmitted from cultural group to cultural group, it's that literally we can trace from the Laurasian origins the spread and not the diffusion of these mythological motifs. And in doing so, he's able to take an approach where he recognizes the system and the narrative underlying the expression, the mythological expression. Now that's exactly parallel to the capacity that we have to develop to move into a meta-analysis to perceive the integral whole. So there are a few features of the Laurasian mythological narrative that I want to draw upon. One is the birth from primordial waters, the archaic, the Father Heaven, Mother Earth, and also the appearance of 4 ages, which appears as Kali Yuga, sometimes as 5, appears as consciousness structures, all of which are relating and expressing the same gesture. Then we have the bringing of fire and ultimately the emergence of a new heaven and a new earth. So the new heaven and the new earth, likewise, to the potential relating to the potential emergence of the integral consciousness. So in the Homa, what the encountering phase is the phase in which the deity personified in the flame is still held to be outside of one. So in the synthesis of yoga, Aurobindo expresses this and says, the question is how far the perfected human being can raise himself above mind, enter into some kind of fusing union with the supramental, and build up in himself a level of supermind, a developed gnosis by the form and power of which the divine Shakti can directly act, not through a mental translation, but organically in her supramental nature. So, how is this done? You can see how this corresponds to the descent, likewise, of the integral consciousness. So how is this done? Aurobindo proposes the simple model. So the most basic of which is recognizable as calming meditation. But Aurobindo also states that instead of proceeding to silence the mind completely, another way is to recognize a division of the mind into an inner and an outer part, so that the inner mind can be made receptive and the outer mind can be active. This is accomplished in Aurobindo's model through focusing the awareness at the crown. For others, though, opening to the heart is more appropriate, and Aurobindo proposes concentrating the consciousness at the heart. But in addition, he recognizes that for some of us who are in the mental rational sphere, there must be a way to employ that natural tendency to likewise gain this type of gnosis. So a fourth method he highlights proceeds by heightening and amplifying the subtlety and depth of thought to the point where it begins opening to intuition. He says the mental apparatus of modern man can itself be made a medium for its own self-exceeding. This is an image of Maitreya. And as Gebser says, at the moment of the mutation now occurring, the mutation will also have its incarnation. The Maitreya is an image of the future Buddha. And this is, I perceive this to be actually an expression of integral consciousness. Just as one could likewise see, one could likewise view the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost presaging the second coming of Christ in an etheric form, in an energetic form, in a form in which perception will be able to perceive, where the consciousness will be able to perceive, quite literally, cause and effect without any limit, so that conscience will be in service, omniscience will be in the service of conscience, which is how one philosopher interprets the coming of Christ in the etheric. So that man is Victor Tomberg, author of Meditations on the Tarot. He says, "The fire of prayer will unite with the limpid water of the peace of meditation. The alchemical marriage of the sun and moon, of fire and water, will take place in him. The union of the principles of prayer and meditation, for which the future Buddha avatar will represent, will be in fact the crowning of a long series of efforts aiming at this end through the course of the centuries, the result of a long preparation through the course of mankind's spiritual history. He's represented as a Buddha in canonical Buddhist art, not in a meditation posture with crossed legs, but rather seated as a European, this latter posture symbolizing the synthesis of the principle of prayer and that of meditation." This is a line from Vertically Oriented, from chapter 41 of the Tao Te Ching. And it says, "The advancing Tao appears to be retreating." So just as we can see in Aurobindo's approach to the Vedas, he turned to the source of Hindu philosophy, and yet transformed it through his own perception of the whole, based upon his lived experience in meditation. Similarly, we see this image of fire at the core of the sacrifice, moving through culture from its most archaic origin, which recent findings have suggested has pushed back the estimated first control of fire by literally 1 million years. I wanted to share a piece of that, about that with you. Okay. So some of the first evidence for the use of fire exists in South Africa, deep within the Wonderwerk cave. The discovery of this site has pushed the evidence of the deliberate use of fire back by approximately 1 million years. But perhaps even more telling is the presence in this site of quartz, red ochre, and other minerals in the 3-meter-high and 100-meter deep cave, suggesting that the site was used for ritual purposes, with estimates of at least 300,000 to 500,000 years of explicit ritual use. Such archaeological findings are often tied to the central role that the harnessing of fire and cooked food played in the development of the human brain. Likewise, the assumption that the process of harnessing fire played a role in fostering the social organization of humankind. For example, coordinated activities of gathering wood, maintaining fire, cooking would certainly require significant cooperation. It can be posited that a ritualization of behavior follows from these functions. While these archaeological findings are inconclusive, the location of the fires deep inside the cave suggests that perhaps the purpose was less utilitarian still. For is not the process of retreating deep into a dark space and kindling a fire itself a ritual expression? Such a possibility would push the potential timing of transition from archaic to magical consciousness even further back than Gebser himself suggests. But as Gebser notes, the archaic structure in our sense is by no means primitive. Regardless of such distinction, we see that in its very nature, fire is disposed towards a ritualized practice that points to the later development of fire cults. So from our understanding of precisely how the fire can influence the rigidity of metal, we can see that images of flow, as emphasized in the Tao Te Ching, are equally expressions of the potential that the integral consciousness has for the supersession of the patriarchy, and indeed of the state. So Gebser says, as Gebser says, any sweeping changes on Earth are not only changes of the Earth, they not only occur here on Earth, but also there. And I believe this is an image of the necessity of the concretization of the spiritual, which we see playing out in the relationship of Gebser's understanding of Aurobindo's energy and the influence that it had in his model. So we close with this, the last hexagram of the I Ching, which communicates to us that when things end, a new beginning is inherent and naturally arises from the conclusion. Just as this spiritual force was emanating from Aurobindo and could be perceived by Gebser, I'm going to conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. So we have a couple minutes for questions. We want to keep it a little tight. So does anybody, just anything on the tip of anyone's tongue?
Set up a brief comment. Reminded you that Orbindo could have got something from Gebser, some periods in his paragraph.
What do you mean?
I haven't read Orbindo in a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and noticed the whole thing was one sentence.
Oh. So that's another thing that they have in common? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
PowerPoint, yeah.
Comes in better.
I hope so.
I mean, these days everything's on a computer, but I remember the days when it's paper and everything thrown in the basket. It's still kind of archetypal thing like that.
I think it's this one, PowerPoint Slide, I think. I hope. Yeah. I'm going to take a quick break to the restroom now.
Okay, so just remind me, nobody's gonna. So yeah, four tickets. She's gonna fill out like the until class to get her reimbursement circle. So she's like, I'm not gonna show Chelsea. But she sends her
Yeah, me too. And someone else had resonated, but now I realize that. And naturally, I'm driving.
Good thing you didn't know.
Or the end of the beginning would be, exactly. The one that the condition comes up again into the I like much better than not knowing.
It's also important to know you know where she was to
Cold in here? That feels like the cold.
That's yours. So you brought it in a plastic container? I always keep my.
And everybody's in silence, and the guy is sort of standing.
First time they follow me where I go. What do you do? So friends of Jeremy. Very important.
That was the question that the Twitter CEO asked me. So I was so proud of him. You know, when I tell the story to people, I say, you never know what's politics. Or I say,
Who's coming?
Nicholas.
So we got one more, right? Nicholas, and then, so they told us we have to be like out of here by 6:15. Apparently they have someone else coming in.
Okay, so do we have to put the
We
chairs
don't have to do anything with the chairs or even the podium. They just said maybe move this table a little to the side,
Okay.
wedge it, and then make sure that that
Books in the
table, all the food here can go over there.
Okay, so we
And
just
that
move the two
table's
tables.
blank.
Oh, they need the table there.
Yeah, just leave the table there and leave it clean.
Okay,
But
so
that one with our books we can keep water.
What if we do this? Because we're going to then put away the equipment, and we can move the table in the back and put the food, all the food things on that table.
Okay.
Did you follow Brent? Is he okay?
Yeah, he's okay.
He's got space.
Yeah, he's got some space. It's just saying it didn't go exactly the way he wanted it to. So he's upstairs having a cigarette.
I was feeling him like getting like really like connected to the subject.
Could you stand there for it so I can get it?
It was too big for translation.
Yeah.
But I was like, I was feeling ready.
But the abstract was beautiful. And I feel like that was our connection.
That's video too, huh?
Kind of a flaming eruption. It's like a spark, and we all felt it when we read it. And I feel like he's trying to communicate whatever was packed in that spark.
It's like it's a life topic.
Yeah, that's. It can be implicated, but maybe not directly expressed or something. So, I don't know. I thought it was great anyway. Very interesting. Yeah.
You move the slides ahead with
So this
just the arrow. Okay.
Right to the, and then you
Okay.
go back. You just
Right.
go back.
Okay.
Very linear.
Good.
Extremely mental structure.
That's pretty easy. And I have a handout of my slides if people want to.
Oh, may I'll pass it around when people sit down. I'm going to go herd the rest of the cats outside.
Okay.
Okay.
But then we realize that we have very boring, to have all the facts.
My neighbor has a master's
To open up
top rank.
So it's all.
It used to be top rank in the country, it's still top
I
rank.
love this.
Unfortunately, it just came in for the last slide.
And it's, yeah, exactly. And they're all really interesting. I think what hopefully to get to the
When they're hitting the degree in psychology or the
The mind is going again this year. And you can access it later.
I would say that's
Yeah.
they wanted to know
they're not so
you have
She said she watched it. Yeah, I was surprised to hear her say that. I didn't know it was
Wow, you made it.
And then I think that last year.
Loosen up here.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your patience. I know we're going a little over. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
What time is it?
Oh.
5:15. Okay. Man, Potter. New York concert. Huh. This is inspired attacks on a New York concert.
Oh, jeez.
Subways on American.
Oh boy. Be careful, you know.
These are handouts for you.
All right, everybody. So we're going to start settling back in.
I will send you.
We're at our last talk for this evening. We have a sheet going around today.
Oh, okay.
And I noticed within my own experience taking healing jobs. I said, wow, this isn't supposed to happen in October. And it's true. I mean, no, any stages. You start to notice, you feel the dizziness, irritability.
All right. So here we are at the last presentation of this evening.
Really?
Yes. And so we have Nicholas Brink. His essay is called Experiencing Time-Free Transparency. Nicholas Brink is a clinical psychologist. He's the past president of the American Association for the Study of Mental Imagery, which is now part of the International Association for the Study of Dreams, which he is a member of the board, and author of numerous journal articles and 6 books. To name a few: Grendel and His Mother, Healing the Traumas of Childhood Through Dreams, Imagery and Hypnosis, The Power of Ecstatic Trance, Practices for Healing, Spiritual Growth, and Accessing the Universal Mind, Baldur's Magic, The Power of Norse Shamanism and Ecstatic Trance, Beowulf's Ecstatic Trance Magic, Accessing the Archaic Powers of the Universal Mind, and there's a few others, and we have actually some back here, so if you'd like to check them out this weekend, maybe after this presentation or maybe tomorrow as well, they're back at the table. And yeah, since reading Ever-Present Origin in 2008, it has played a major role in his thinking and writing, so please welcome Nicholas Brink.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Oops, wrong way. There we go. As we mutate beyond the dream world of the archaic era and the spirit-full era of our ever-present origin, we enter the magical world of when the magical powers of the shaman, of the hunter and gatherers, provided us with access to the spirits while in an altered state of consciousness, a dreamlike state of trance passed on to them from the earlier era. During the following mythical era, special healing practitioners, such as Asclepius of Melos, continued to value and practice the powers of dreaming and healing. As we now enter the era of time-free transparency, this transparent and time-free state of consciousness will not be available to just shaman of the community, but to all of us, as we again develop our skills of entertaining this altered state of consciousness, whether through paying attention to and valuing our nighttime dreams, or through hypnotic or ecstatic trance that I have used in my practice of clinical psychology. What this altered state of consciousness offers, whoops, did I go too far? No. What this altered state of consciousness offered the ancients was lost in our rational era of living in a world of our five senses, with the loss of our sixth sense, being now our sixth sense is being regained as we enter the fourth dimensional era of time-free transparency. To begin, the time-free nature of altered states of consciousness is readily revealed in our nighttime dreams. In dreams, you often find your adult self back in your childhood home, relating to childhood friends, or re-experiencing other events from your past. These dreams demonstrate time-free or linear time. Time-free from linear time. Then the transparency available to us through these altered states of consciousness is recognized in the so-called primitive societies, the hunting and gathering societies that continue to exist on Earth today. These societies provide us with considerable evidence of the magical powers of their shaman, power that we now are beginning to rediscover. Vine Deloria, a Standing Rock Sioux, in his last book before his death in 2005, the book is The World We Used to Live In, is a collection of experiences of American Indian medicine men that demonstrate this very real power of healing and of communicating and seeing over great distances that exist beyond our usual sensory ability that is restricted to our five senses. Whole clans seem to be able to remain in touch with each other no matter where their members roam. One of Deloria's narratives is of the medicine man White Shield. Siaka tells the story that he lost two horses, and White Shield, using his way of knowing, tells Siaka that the horses were 15 miles west of Porcupine Hills at the fork of Porcupine Creek. He knew that a traveler was coming from the direction and would return the horses. This proved to be true. A neighbor of Siaka had been on his way home when he recognized the horses and brought them back. I have been a psychologist for 47 years and have used dream work, clinical hypnosis extensively in therapy. Then 10 years ago, I discovered and received training to become an instructor of ecstatic trance at the Cucamonga Institute that is near Santa Fe, New Mexico. From these experiences with these altered states of consciousness or forms of trance, I contend that time-free transparency is experienced whether in our nighttime dreams, hypnosis, or ecstatic trance, but especially ecstatic trance that I will describe in a few minutes. Gebser contends that the extrasensory experiences are not a manifestation of the nature of our current three-dimensional rational consciousness. He states that the patent senselessness and worthlessness of the phenomena produced by such spiritualistic and mediumistic means is clear evidence of their origin in the web of magical enmeshment, characterized by its fortuitousness and lack of directedness. The procedure is unnatural because it contradicts the nature of the three-dimensional consciousness structure, which is far most part still proper to a contemporary man. I find that the use of these extrasensory trance experiences are very full of fortuitous direction and meaning in the process of healing emotional and psychological problems and in carrying us beyond. I'd like to offer one example of the healing powers of these altered states of experiences, specifically ecstatic trance. Maria, one person in my ecstatic trance group, reported that she was struggling with quitting smoking and to this point in time had been unsuccessful. Though I did not know what specifically she was working on when she had the following ecstatic trance experience, the following week she returned to report that she had not smoked since the experience. And that was in October 2007. She reported, while in trance, I began in a womb-shaped den-like cave of branches. I was trying to figure out what animal I was, and then I realized I was a very happy little girl, about 8 years old. I was alone but happy and free. I was in a city on a sidewalk. The city was gray and ugly, but I had felt alive and happy. I walked up a road that turned into a wide bridge in a very industrial city setting. I stayed on the bridge a while, feeling happy, young, and free. Then I began to cross the bridge and realized that it led into an enormous warehouse. I did not want to go in. I tried to turn around. Behind me was the city, ugly and gray, but home. I became very, very sad. Then I became annoyed because I could not get off the bridge. I wanted to change visions, but that did not work. I wanted to end the meditation, but I was still on the bridge. So I let all emotions escape me and entered the warehouse. It was hell, a hellish landscape. I marched through and exited the other side. I was surprised to see the road continue with a beautiful and colorful landscape. I lay down in the grass. I knew it was beautiful, but I could not feel the same excitement. I was older now. Maria knew that it would be hell to quit smoking, but this ecstatic experience greatly abbreviated her time spent in hell. She had not had a cigarette since that experience. Her naive 8-year-old self, the part of her who was happy in the gray, polluted city of smoking, was sad and wanted off the bridge that led her through the hell of quitting. But her older self summoned the will to enter the warehouse and pass through to the other side, to a place of beauty in being a non-smoker. From my understanding of the shamanic magic of hunter and gatherers, this procedure was very natural to them, a naturalness lost in the restricted nature of our three-dimensional consciousness. But now, as we move into the fourth dimension, it is being regained. To offer another example of this ecstatic extrasensory perception, an example that changed my life, a number of years ago I attended a workshop on neuro-linguistic programming, attended by about 50 people. One experience that was offered in the workshop occurred when we were instructed to break up into groups of 3. One person in the group was instructed to sequentially present 6 imagery experiences to a second person who was to imagine each of these 6 experiences, while the third person was to carefully watch the second person, noting breathing rate, muscle tension, skin coloration, etc. Then the second person was to select one image and reimagine it, while the third person tried to identify which image of the 6 was being reimaged by using what had been observed. I remember 3 of the 6 images. One was sitting in a comfortable chair after a big Thanksgiving dinner. Another was waiting for a plane that was an hour late. And the third was walking down the street in the evening while it was snowing. When it was my turn to observe, I automatically closed my eyes like I would do with hypnosis and experienced with the imager while in trance, while she was experiencing without consciously watching for her physiological cues. Then afterwards, when she selected an image to reimagine, I was immediately able to identify it. And when she happened to switch images, I immediately recognized that she changed to the new image. Another person in the workshop who was also experienced using hypnosis was able to also quickly identify the correct image being reimagined. This greatly increased my confidence in my ability to see beyond my 5 senses. Such extraordinary perception is one aspect of the transparency found in dreams and trance experiences. Now the third one, okay. Another aspect of transparency is the integration of dualistic thinking. Again, quoting Gebser, contemporary methods employ predominantly dualistic procedures that are not extended beyond simple subject-object relationships. They limit our understanding to what is commensurate with the Western mentality. To move beyond this limited understanding, an attempt at diaphany, or to render transparent, is to move to a new relationship that is no longer dualistic, that does not threaten man with the loss of identity or of being equated with an object. In other words, what was a duality will become an integrated whole. Considering the subject-object duality, what we consider rational logic breaks down in trance and dreams. That is, in the rational world, if A causes B, then B cannot cause A. But in trance and dreams, B can also cause A. Thus, the subject-object duality of rational thinking is lost. For example, I can be outraged by being attacked by someone, but I can at the same time be the attacker. That is both the subject and the object of the experience. But Gebser takes such dualities even further in considering other life's dualities. For example, he considers the nature of the soul in terms of both death and life, whereas this duality to the rational person is clear in its distinction between life and death. As we move into the era of time-free transparency, this duality is lost. But death and life are aspects of the new understanding of the soul. Gebser also examines the yin-yang symbol, the pole of the yin within the yang and the pole of the yang within the yin. The meaning of this symbol goes even deeper than Gebser portrays when one realizes that arising from the very beginning, in the state of emptiness, of doing nothing, that is Wu Ji, the premortal yin and the premortal yang arise, and Tai Yi being the separation and duality of the yin-yang. The yin-yang again becomes together in Tai Chi, the effort to retort to Wu Ji, the emptiness before creation. This effort to return to Wu Ji is returning us to our ever-present origin, but now with a new understanding. In considering another example of our dualistic or polyistic thinking, many years ago, when I first read Frank Waters' Book of Hopi, I remember being unnerved by the fluidity of symbols. A symbol could mean a number of different things, which collided with my own thinking. For example, green can mean go, death, new life, money, and other possibilities, with more sides to its meaning than just a duality. Trying to find one meaning of the symbol, that is, the common denominator, loses something in the transparent understanding of its meaning. I now find comfort in such diversity of symbols. For example, thinking of the medicine wheel, east means spring, a new dawn, the rising sun, the beginning of life, the planting of our gardens. Trying to find a simple definition in this diversity, such as the beginning, loses the depth of its meaning. The induction ritual for inducing ecstatic trance involves calling the spirits of each direction, and in this litany, the same diversity is found in the spirits of each direction. For example, as we continue around the medicine wheel and call the spirits of the south, we call the spirits of the warmth of midday, of summer, of the growth of our children and the growth of our gardens, again taking us beyond dualistic thinking. In working with dreams or metaphors within a dream, it can mean many things, and saying, Aha, that's it. With just one interpretation, the power of the dream is lost. Though it is important to work with a dream and its meaning, it is important to let it be what it is with its many meanings, to let the meanings be fluid and diaphanous. I find the word transparent loses something in its limiting, and is limiting. That which is diaphanous is in motion, shimmering, fluttering, and continually changing in transparency. A fluid transparency like the gossamer gowns of an ancient goddess. Other writers support the same mutations of consciousness as we move into the new era of the loss of our sense of duality. Carl Johann Kalaman describes the world that we now live in as one of dualistic thinking, automatic ways of thinking that have been our survival in this world of separation. Separation so deep within us that it blocks our true connection with the earth and the community of all life on earth. Unlearning that which separates us will bring us into a new world of harmony and peace. Charles Eisenstein describes in great detail the world of the separation that keeps us tied to our dualistic thinking and what is needed for us to break free of it. Let us now examine the nature of ecstatic trance. Research of this shamanic modality has been limited primarily to the field of anthropology, including the research anthropologist Felicitas Goodman. The energy of shamanic and ecstatic trance is seen in the familiar images of the energetic dancing of indigenous tribes from around the world. Dancing that is performed to the rapid beat of drums and other percussion instruments. Such dance celebrations, celebrating the spirits of the earth and of the ancestors, may go on for many hours, with some participants, often the shaman, falling into a deep trance. From this trance experience, much is to be learned from their calling upon the spirits that give direction to life, providing healing, answers to questions, opening the door to foreseeing into distant places and into the future. The power offered by ecstatic trance and what can be learned from it, so valued by our hunting and gathering ancestors, has been forgotten and ignored during the current era of our rational consciousness. But as we move into the new age, these trance visions will again become valued and called upon. I have found that this altered state of consciousness is exceptionally valuable in the process of healing and learning from the past and as we move into the future. The energy of ecstatic trance is very high and different from the quieting energy of hypnosis, trance that is induced through the slow spoken words of relaxation, quieting the mind and slowing the body functions. Felicitas Goodman recognized that speaking in tongues, as occurs in the apostolic churches, is akin to ecstatic trance. Her research in ecstatic trance thus began with her dissertation research on speaking in tongues in the Spanish-speaking and Mayan-speaking apostolic churches of Mexico. This research led her to identify 4 necessary components for the induction of the trance state that produces speaking in tongues. First, an open mind and a relaxed body, along with the expectation of a pleasurable but normal state of reality. Second, a sacred space, one separate from the activities of everyday life. Third, a meditative technique, such as counting one's breath to calm the analytic mind. Fourth, rhythmic stimulation to the nervous system through rattling or drumming. These 4 components were evident in the worship services of the apostolic churches, with the congregation's expectation of speaking in tongues. the sacred space of the church, quieting the mind with prayer and the rhythmic stimulation of hand clapping. Goodman then designed a ritual of these four components that separated them from the context of the church. Her ritual begins with a discussion of what to expect from a static trance and the answer to questions. The sacred space for this ritual was designated by smudging the space with and each participant with the smoke of a bundle of burning herbs, and by calling the spirits of the six directions, the litany that I briefly introduced earlier. Following this litany, the meditative technique to quiet the mind is offered that entails sitting in silence in a comfortable position while counting one's breath for 5 minutes. Then the stimulation of the nervous system with the drumming and rattling commenced and lasted for 15 minutes. The beat is approximately at a rate of 210 beats per minute. After receiving her PhD from Ohio State University, Dr. Goodman took a position at Denison University in Greenville, Ohio. With her students, she experimented with this ritual and found that the students did go into trance, though she concluded from this experimentation that the trance lacked direction and meaning. She then read an article by the Canadian psychologist V.F. Emerson, who in his research with the various meditative disciplines found that different body postures had specific but different effects on such body functions as heartbeat, breathing, skin moisture, and bowel motility. With this discovery, Goodman searched ethnographic journals, books, and museums to find what she believed were the body postures used by both contemporary and ancient shaman, body postures that suggested religious ritual activity. She identified approximately 50 such postures that she used in her continued research, following the ritual that she had already developed, but added to it these body postures. She had her students at Denison sit, stand, or lay in one of these postures while she shook her rattle and beat her drum. With the addition of the body postures, which was held by the participants for 15 minutes of drumming or rattling, she found the direction and meaning that was initially missing without the use of the body postures. What she found was that some postures provided specific. What she found was that some specific body postures elicited a sensation of bringing a healing or strengthening energy into one's body. Other postures are for divination, for seeking answers to questions, or for looking into the future. Then there are those postures that bring about the sensation of shape-shifting, or a metamorphosis experience of becoming some animal or other living being, or some inanimate substance or feature of the earth. Some postures are for journeying into the underworld, others for journeying into the middle world, and some for journeying into the upper world. Then there are those postures that bring about a death rebirth experience. The effect of these postures on the ecstatic experience makes considerable sense when one examines what they communicate non-verbally. In selecting an example from each, consider the bear spirit posture for healing. With one's hand on the lower abdomen while breathing from the diaphragm, healing becomes evident with each breath as one inhales a sense of healing energy, with the exhale, the healing energy spreads throughout one's body. The Mayan oracle posture for divination, with the left hand raised, is reminiscent of Rodin's The Thinker, of waiting for an answer to your question. The Olmec prince, with the knuckles of both hands resting on the floor as the forelegs, suggests shape-shifting of some four-legged animal, though the posture though the posture often shifts me to a bird or snake or without forelegs. The the lower world posture of lying prone close to the earth takes the person into the underworld, whereas the priestess of Malta, with her rotund body and her right hand pointing to the earth, suggests, I am planted here on the earth. The Venus of Goggenburg, with her right hand pointed to the heavens as she looked upwards in the direction suggests journeying into the upper world. And this posture is the oldest one that we've used. It was 3,200 years old and found on the banks of the Danube River. It's only like 2.5 inches long. Then there's the feathered serpent with hands on the waist, suggesting a sense of determination, of saying, I am determined to give up my old way in favor of the new, healthier way of the... I was first introduced to ecstatic trance when I was president of the American Association for the Study of Mental Imagery. In the beginning stages of developing the program for 2004, the 2004 annual conference, Felicitas Goodman was invited to be a keynote speaker. But because of some problems out of our control, the conference did not happen. But I briefly talked to Felicitas on the telephone and read her book, Where the Spirits Ride the Wind. I was quite impressed with the outcome of her research, such that in 2007, I offered a workshop at the annual conference of the International Association for the Study of Dreams. The Mental Imagery Association has since become part of the Dream Association. The workshop was offered each of 4 mornings of the conference, and I had the opportunity of using 8 of her ecstatic trance postures. Granted, the participants in the group were there because of their interest in dreams, thus quite receptive to altered states of consciousness, but I was astounded by the effect of the postures that matched the results as determined by Goodman. As a result, I returned home and started a group using the postures, a group that at first met weekly and now meets monthly and has continued for 10 years. From the ecstatic experiences of the participants of these group sessions, as well as a number of other workshops I have offered around the country, I continue to be very impressed with the power of these ecstatic postures and the power of ecstatic trance. I have collected over 3,000 ecstatic trance experiences that have been the core of my 5 books on ecstatic trance. In our ecstatic trance group, when sharing our experiences, we have come to expect commonality. One example is my experience of when I was standing across from Sarah. I saw her dissolve into a sea of colors that floated back and forth through the room before they exited the room through the door and formed a tree on the hillside behind our house. In Sarah's experience, she saw the top of my head pop open and a flock of colorful birds fly out, flying back and forth across the room before exiting through the door and outside that formed a marble statue. On another occasion, I was invited to do 6 ecstatic workshops with a group of senior citizens in our community. During our 6th session, I had the group divide up into pairs and instructed each pair only to be aware of their partner as they went into trance. Both my partner and I experienced spiraling energy in our experiences. The commonality of the experiences of another pair was of abstract shapes and colors, and the third pair of flying as birds. With the 4th couple, a husband and wife, the husband experienced walking along the sand of a beach, holding his wife's hand, while his wife experienced her left hand becoming very tired. In conclusion, as a result of my many ecstatic trance experiences, I believe that each of these experiences show transparency, of seeing beyond our five senses, again bringing alive our sixth sense, that was so much part of the life of our ancient ancestors. Okay. Okay.
So we have time for about one or two questions. We have to head out of here.
Okay, I probably walk back so I can hear you better because I'm hard to
I'll
hear.
walk up to you.
So, that was awesome, thank you,
Okay.
I appreciated it. And I want to draw together Jesse's talk and your talk, because having been exposed to Felicitas' work, I discovered that if you place a person in a posture and you insert a needle in an acupuncture point which shares a resonant symbolism with the posture and the direction of the posture, that without any drumming, solely with intention, it will induce an altered state of consciousness that has been extremely consistent with what she has suggested is the pattern.
That's nice. Is that been written up somewhere? I haven't asked and that's one that I'm sure they would love to hear.
I can pass some stuff.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Question over here?
I was wondering about process a little bit, so that there's the meditation where people follow their breath, and then there's the drumming. Are they doing the drumming, or is someone else doing the drumming?
I often do the drumming, or someone else who wants to do the drumming does the drumming. Or occasionally, if it's small, groups real small, I may use a tape of drumming.
Okay. And are they sitting while the drumming is going on, or they're
Oh,
in
no,
a
they're
little postures? Okay.
And the sessions last about 2 hours.
Yeah.
I thought about maybe doing a session here, but I didn't have the 2-hour time slot, so.
All right, thank you.
Maybe tomorrow during lunch, we can take a shorter lunch.
First of all, thank you very much. I enjoyed the talk very much. I'm just curious if you have any experience with producing these ecstatic states, either yourself or with clients, with entheogenic assistance, and if so, how that is different from just doing it from the hypnotic states and so forth that you discussed in the talk. You know, ayahuasca ceremonies, that sort of thing.
We don't use ayahuasca or other drugs. This is this person, but again, I know that can be an aid to some people.
Yeah. Or a distraction, depending if it's misused, certainly.
Yeah. Exactly. No, I've got basically your question. That was
I mean, that sort of answers it. I was just curious if you had the opportunity in your practice to incorporate.
I have another friend who sort of integrates this with yoga, and he's excited about that, though I haven't really experienced how he does that, but it's an interesting concept.
Thank you.
Are you familiar with Datus?
Davis?
D-A-D-A-S?
Davis, no.
Or is it Datus?
I don't know.
Well, okay, it's a yogic practice which puts you in touch with the higher realms. And apparently, I think I have it, but it's a sound that you hear. And that sound it's definitely there most of the time. And I'm just wondering if these...
What's the nature of the sound? You mean a drumming or a rattling or a rattling?
No, I would say more like just a swarm of crickets.
That would be more probably a hypnotic experience, which the experiences from hypnosis as well as from ecstatic trance, I think are very similar. I used to refer to them all as dreamlike experiences, but my mentor with the Institute was against that. So, I mean, the experiences are different. I mean, yeah, but they're very similar in terms of their metaphoric content. So.
There's intention involved.
Yeah. But when you say the soft cricket-like music or the nature of music,
tested for tinnitus, everything.
Yeah.
And then I recently learned that it is.
I would say that the nature of the trance here would be more hypnotic, but still it would be very effective, yes.
But you need someone that has it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, Mom and I have, because Mom, it's calm, it's usually most of the time. I have a friend who has the same thing, we have it at the same time.
Don't worry, there are cochlear implants, that's how
I stopped being doing therapy as a psychologist because I became too deaf to really hear. But I just got this cochlear implant about 3-4 months ago, and it's been pretty amazing. But I still have a hard time hearing people that are noisy, with some noise in the background. So. Okay, thank you. You're interested, here are copies of the paper, and in the back, I should have mentioned my 5 books. One is very general, one is using ecstatic trance to commune with my ancestors, another is to commune with the spirits of the earth, one is looking at looking at ecstatic trance as a mode of psychotherapy, and the 5th one is communing with the earth in terms of healing the earth. And they're back there in the back table. Oops.
Which one is the one about healing the earth? Yeah. Which one is the one about healing the earth?
Okay, so we're passing around the email list. If you could just add your email to that, we can send you
Writing exercises.
writing exercises.
For those of you who are not presenting, I don't have your emails. If you would like to participate in our eco-poetic writing exercise, please write your email down, and you will receive the first set of questions following your first exercise for this evening.
And day 3, so day 3 is going to be at 21 Howard Street, 3R, and that's down here. In the Bowery, right? So it's going to be in the Bowery, and that'll be day 3, and it's going to be probably around half a day. And we're going to have a luncheon at the end, kind of all come together, have some food, and chat. So we're going to have some talks in the morning, and then we'll have lunch, and close out the conference. So that's Sunday, and that's 21 Howard Street, 3R. And if you need that, just let me know. Just send me an email. My email should be on, or send me an email. It's on Gebser.org. And if you haven't made the payment, the easiest way to do it is just Gebser.org. Go to the conference page, and there's an Eventbrite widget. So, yeah, you can use PayPal, credit card, whatever. So we convene tomorrow at 9:10 a.m. and we start our plan. Yes. 9:10 a.m.
So does it tonight? Jeremy, what is tonight's dinner? Is that a word thing?
So thank you, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. We're going to be...
looking forward to listening to. Listening to spirit, I hope.
Listen to exactly.
Yeah, I was. Not listening to myself. You're going home?
That's where I went. It's little.
Yeah, it's little.
I didn't have to go to the
One last week.
taken all of it a little too much.
Oh.
Idea, you know what I mean?
This thing.
I don't